for Soapbox as well as the news, just because I know our viewers are going to have a lot of fun with old Ben Brambles. And
Baby!
so, I mean,
I like the fact that he's
it's only an impact factor of 1.01.
Hey,
oh, man.
better than most wildlife management journals.
I know.
It kind of
I
is.
know.
I mean,
And it's a tick on his CV regardless, right? Is he going up for full? Did he have to pull some shit together to go up for full professor and needed some like
I don't know.
numbers?
I mean, so if you look him up, and he's clearly got like some book that he's working on about COVID, and it seems like there's a non-meat sort of approach to like his bramblings.
yeah.
See, that would have been a good one.
Bramblings. That's a bird, right? A brambling?
That is amazing. Bramblings.
A brambling is a
Oh.
bird, right? Isn't it like a Neo-Arctic bird in Russia and
Yeah, I think
sometimes
so.
comes to Alaska? I think so.
I don't
No.
care. I just want to use it as a verb now.
No, we can
Right.
bramble the bramblings.
Like if that would have been a great name for his webpage or his blog.
Bramblings.
Yeah.
To our viewers who are tuning in right now, welcome. This is what we call a cold open to Wildlife Semi-Filtered, and we are. I'm lucky that we didn't say anything too inappropriate, but what we're talking about is something for Soapbox, which will really grind your gears later, and it comes from our friend Dr. Ben Brambling.
It is a
Who is
bird.
at Princeton, right?
Well, he's in Australia now, but yeah, that is a bird. It's been called conch of the north and the mountain finch.
The mountain finch.
Yeah.
So welcome everyone to Wildlife Semi-Filtered. Glad to have you guys back. I actually don't have any data right now about how many people are tuning in, but welcome to the three. So I'm Blake Grisham from Texas Tech University and joined by several special guests tonight. So first we have our co-host, Dr. Conway and Dr. John Tomacek. Tune into the previous ones if you don't know who they are. And to save a little bit of time, Dr. Sarah Fritz, why don't you introduce yourself to our dozens of audiences out there and let them know about what you're about.
Sure. So yes, I'm Sarah Fritz, an assistant professor at Texas State University. I came down here about 3 years ago from Texas Tech, where I was a research assistant professor for a little bit, but also a postdoc under Dr. Grisham, working with lesser prairie chickens. Before that, I was at North Carolina State University, and I centered a lot of my research around renewable energy ecology, and there I was focused on reptile, amphibian, and small mammal responses to woody biomass harvest and woody biomass for energy production. And since coming here to Texas, or Central Texas, now that I'm down in San Marcos, I'm really doing a lot of bat work and wind energy work, but also kind of all over the board. Some of my focus recently has been bats, but I'm still doing some quail work and snakes and passerines, and I kind of take my road down too many paths sometimes, I'm not going to lie. But thank you for having me, and happy to be here. And yeah, looking forward to the conversation to come.
Glad to have you. You're a little too formal. My name is Blake, but that's okay.
Okay.
So just as a FYI to everyone, Sarah is one of the few scientists I know who actually studies every vertebrate known to man in terms of species. So if it has a spine, unlike old Ben Bramble, I suspect she studied it. So we're going to have lots of fun with that tonight. So beyond Sarah, we're going to use first names tonight.
Okay, that's great.
And we'll use them interchangeably. And I don't know who this person is. Does anyone know Ethan Tempera?
I was on the Zoom call with Madeline.
Oh, okay, Ethan. Yeah, okay, there you go.
How are y'all?
I'm like, man, we're so popular now. We're getting bombarded by random folks.
Well, and so now that we've been Zoom bombed by Ethan, who's one of the Texas A&M,
he gone. He left.
the Texas A&M student chapter members, we can circle back later and talk about how small the wildlife field is, or we can throw old Ethan under the bus right now if we want to. Dr. Grisham, what do you think?
Are we going to throw him under the bus?
Ethan, remember he was on 2 Zoom calls at the same time the other day.
Oh yeah, so Miss Thornley, I sent her a text that said, "What are you eating in your Zoom call with your students?" And her mind just exploded. So this was Madeline Thornley, Warren, by the way.
Yeah.
Ethan was on a Zoom call with her as a TA for another class, and Ethan was doing the dual Zoom thing. He had one on his phone and one on the laptop, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm on 2 Zoom calls," and he happened to like turn his phone where I could see it, and sure enough, it was Madeline with a thing of fried rice just shoving it in her mouth, and I was like, "That was Thornley." I'm like, "That's gold." I'm like, "I need that information." Ethan, I just outed you to Madeline because she's on a warpath and she's looking for how I actually knew. So it's nice knowing you, bud.
That's all right. She's not my TA.
She's not your TA. Why were you in the Zoom call?
She was holding the review.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
And so I just needed an audio recording so I could study it later.
Okay, that makes sense. But she's still going to try to find you, and
I'm sure.
She was really embarrassed, but she's embarrassed.
I brought it up to her too, and she asked if it was Ethan.
What did she?
Then, and I was like, yes.
Probably because I was the only one in the meeting not responding to any questions.
Very nice. So to continue our introductions real quick, Sophie, Mr. Richards, Mr. Parker, Ethan, why don't you guys introduce yourself in a very non-random fashion, and then we'll get on to updates from our affiliated wildlife societies, and we'll obviously fill everyone in about why the Aggies have joined us, which is a great thing.
Cool. Well, I'll go first since I'm the only Texas Tech here. I'm Sophie Morris. I'm the president of the Wildlife Society here at Texas Tech. I'm a junior wildlife biology major, and I was told my introductions were lame earlier by Dr. Grisham.
They were subpar and inadequate. And I almost said I had this feeling deep in my chest this morning. It's like, I need to send them a nasty gram. Thankfully, something else took hold, and I had to put that fire out, so you escaped. So you better do well right now. I have it queued up.
I thought I was done, but I guess I'll keep going. So what else? I am from all over the country because my dad is in the military, and I am filling out the Texas chapter scholarship application right now, and I'm stumped on the hometown. I have no idea what to put. So if that's the only thing I'm stumped on, I guess I'm probably in good shape, but I will need to figure that out soon.
So Sophie, speaking as the Texas chapter of the Wildlife Society president, I'm going to say, since your parents were in military service, you get to write hometown, America, USA. Done.
Just put the American flag. Just get a sticker with the American flag and just put it right over that hometown. Right?
Yeah. With
if anyone questions you on it, your subsequent answer should be freedom. And that's it.
Perfect. Well, I'm glad I brought that up in my introduction then.
Isn't your dad like a general or something like that?
He's a 3-star, yeah.
Yeah, so all right, you know what?
Wow.
If they reply, just write General Morris, all right? And then have it sent to his office, and then, let freedom freedom ring.
Yeah, that supersedes pretty much everything else.
Right.
Okay.
You're not playing your cards here, right? I mean, you should have your own 3-star jacket wearing around with your own freedom eagle.
That would be so cool. We're not allowed to, but
I know.
we're not the 3 stars. We just have to move around with them.
Anyway, so you did much better, but we're still going to work on that. I wish I could blink a little better.
Can you not wink?
That just looks creepy.
I know.
It's like a bad taste in your mouth.
It's like all of a sudden you started twitching.
He was thinking about our earlier introductions.
So you were thinking about this for a long time?
All right, I'll go ahead and introduce myself.
Thank you.
So for those who weren't on the last meeting, my name is Ethan Tapera. I'm a senior here at Texas A&M studying wildlife and fisheries sciences. Both of my parents graduated from Tech, so they were pretty disappointed in me when I decided to go to Texas A&M.
I think so.
but I enjoy it. I love Texas A&M.
Alrighty, I'll go next. Howdy, my name is Joe, and I am from Boerne, Texas. I'm the president of the Texas A&M chapter of the Wildlife Society, and I'm also doing wildlife and fisheries and a double major in entomology.
Wow.
Mr. Parker, your turn, sir.
Howdy, everyone. My name is Hunter Parker. I'm also a senior in wildlife and fisheries at Texas A&M. I'm our student chapter's current publicity officer. I just chugging along this semester. Every semester I take a new course of some sort of taxonomy, and it just makes me love each group more. So I've gone through fishes and birds, and now I'm in mammals, and it's making it harder and harder for me to decide what I want to do. So
you don't have to.
Maybe
you
I'll
don't have
do
to
everything.
Take it from me. Get interested in a concept and an issue, and then study any animal in that. That's fine.
Dr. Fritz and I were actually talking to the Texas State Wildlife Society last night, and she gave that same very relevant advice to all their students who were unsure. Don't pigeonhole yourself, man. Study all the cool things.
My master's was in fisheries. I didn't even say that. So, I've gone all over the board. And it's totally fine. And I don't feel like it set me back at all. So in a lot of ways, it's actually provided opportunities. So you just have to be, you're not an expert in one taxa, but you have to, think about some type of question or something relevant that you can use with all taxa.
Yeah, that's Sarah, just as a FYI for everyone who doesn't know Dr. Fritz, she gives the best advice. So just listen to her. All right.
Not always.
No, I was sitting here thinking, she sent me a text a few days after we had the first semi-filter of the year, and she was like, "You guys are dorks and dudes." They're like, "I know." I'm like, "You want to come on? Like, you want to be on the podcast?" And the reason I want that is I want some sort of intelligent life form on this podcast. So sorry, Sarah, that is you by both.
Yeah. You gotta carry that mantle, Sarah.
Yeah. I was looking forward to like turning my brain off and just going with the flow.
Hey, even at idle, you do much better than the rest of us. And there's a few components that female humans are much smarter than males, just by default. And then two, I know you're the probably most extremely intelligent person I've ever met. So it's on you. So.
Oh well, thank you. And we can retally that at the end of the discussion.
No, for example, when we're talking about the news articles descend for discussion, Warren sends Bramble, which is going to be a topic of conversation. I send one about when grouse attack. And then Tomachek sends one about fat bears, and you send one about ecosystem services and functions. I'm like, I'm not going to read that bullshit.
Hey, why you got to break the curve, Sarah? Don't break the curve.
But that was the point, right? Is that maybe this whole ecosystem service thing is bullshit.
See, you're already outside of my wheelhouse. I cannot have a conversation with you based on the words that just came out of your mouth. So in a few minutes, when we actually have this conversation about news, it's all on you. All right?
Okay.
All right. So, Dr. Fritz, welcome. Sarah, we're glad to have you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And hopefully we'll have you back around at some point if we don't scare you off. That said, if you notice, there's a mixture of Red Raiders and Aggies on this call. And that's because Dr. Conway and myself are the faculty advisors for the Texas Tech chapter of the Wildlife Society, and Dr. Tomachek is the faculty advisor for A&M and their Wildlife Society. And when Sophie and myself and Rainey, we were talking about some of these podcast ideas in April, we're like, is it going to work? We don't know, but we're going to try it out. It did, and we had quite a bit of success, and we didn't want to hold on to that success for ourselves because one of the best things about an ecological education is within our discipline, we're all friends. So I sent John a text one morning when I had one of my great ideas, which that's used facetiously. But why don't you invite your students to be a part of this? Just because we want to get involved. And I enjoy meeting new people. I had a really good time meeting with the Texas State students last night, and I hope some of those guys are on the call. And I had a great time Monday meeting all of our Aggie friends. And they decided to join us. And for our viewers, Dr. Conway, myself, and Dr. Tomachek do most of the work on this because it's just part of our job. We count this as service pretty much. And we want to minimize the work on behalf of our students because they do a lot for our societies. But we do want to use this as an opportunity to get our students engaged, get their faces out there for hiring opportunities, and to serve as a media outlet for what they are doing. So Hunter and Joseph and Ethan, it's really nice to have you guys. Just as a FYI, you guys can't see it, but I have my OBS software, which we were making up terms about what it actually means, which I stream. I have the new semi-filtered um, background on there, so your logo and your school colors are advertised. And go back and watch the Twitch and YouTube, and you'll see how it's all set up. I also have the meme that Warren sent us the other day of Randy Johnson and the pigeon. It's on there as well. It says my plans, and it's the pigeon, and then 2020 is Randy Johnson. So if you guys don't know, this is also a semi-professional baseball podcast, and we will have baseball themed memes and stories throughout. So if you don't know about Randy Johnson and the pigeon, just YouTube it. All right, Randy Johnson and the pigeon. Yeah, YouTube it because it's hilarious.
Blake, this is like when somebody says, "Hey, do you know how they clear beached whales off the beach? You should YouTube that."
I do not, but I will YouTube it later.
Oh,
I'm going to
no.
circle back around after this conversation. I'm going to YouTube it, all right?
I'll remind you.
Thank you. Anyway, Randy Johnson throws like 106, or he did back in his day, and an unfortunate pigeon caught a fastball about 105 down the center, and it exploded. There's nothing left. It gone. So that's our meme. Beyond all the semi-professional stuff, I'm really glad to have you guys here, and I hope you find some value to that. So while I take a media break for 5 minutes, I'm going to turn this over to Sophie and Joseph respectively, so we can talk about so they can talk about TTU's upcoming events as well as A&M's events. Sophie and Joseph, share screen is enabled, so feel free to pull up your PowerPoints. Just random flip of a coin. Sophie, you go first. Joseph, you go second, and then next month we'll switch it around for everyone to be fair. All right. So Sophie, the show is yours by all means.
Great. Well, first, for anyone who isn't watching, I felt a little bad about what I was wearing at first because both Joe and Hunter are wearing very professional chapter polos. But then I looked at what Dr. Grisham was wearing, which is a blue t-shirt that says trunk on it. And I felt much better. My attire.
This is semi-filtered.
I know, but you made me feel like I didn't need to look as professional as these two.
I'm just setting the foundation for your success. Now, if this was a professional podcast like our friends at Borderlands just developed, I would be in my full suit, sitting up astute and displaying facts.
I texted Olivia about that, and she was like, "Don't even, Grisham already." Okay.
And if anyone's listening, check out Borderland at Sol Ross. Check out their new podcast featuring Dr. Arvison. They have actually relevant information and useful information. But us, it's just me wearing my workout t-shirt with Fat Chomp Kitty, because I get tired of seeing really fit people at the rec center with like muscles and sleeveless t-shirts. I'm like, look, I'm old and fat. And that little kitty right there, it's on my shirt, it's pretty, and you like me for it. So don't take yourself too seriously. And I'm glad I set the standard. And I do commend our Aggie friends for looking extremely professional. I'm tenured. I don't have to anymore. I said it around my
Right.
We have different standards at Texas A&M. I know out on the wild dust plains of Lubbock, Texas, it's hard to find a suit of clothes to wear, but we have different standards.
I got to work. This is cotton, which is produced on the high plains, so I'm supporting our local producers. Actually,
you're supporting all that ecological terrorism. I got it. All that devastation on the high plains.
I think this is like 98 polyester. So show me where the polyester fields are, and I'll.
That would be the pump jacks out there as well.
Sophie, by all means, continue this in a professional manner and save us from ourselves here. So.
Okay, I will. Sounds good. So first thing, something I'm very excited about, we are, as of today, one membership away from beating last fall's membership.
Very good.
Which is exciting because of everything going on with COVID. I definitely wasn't expecting that. But all of our members are just so adaptable and motivated. We are just one membership away. So if you're listening and you haven't paid dues yet, do so, and I'll give you a huge air hug because I'm very excited about it. Speaking of that, something for the next two meetings, another kind of cool thing, well, not cool thing about COVID, but something that is able to happen because of COVID is expanding our reach of speakers for these meetings that we're having. So in October, we are having Dr. Southfield from Alaska Game and Fish, and then we also have Dr. Dan Thompson from Wyoming Game and Fish. So if you're interested in kind of seeing what other state agencies are doing, as well as maybe other species that are getting worked on, or if you just want to kind of hear about cool things that are going on in the United States, tune in for those 2 meetings. It's the first Wednesday and the third Wednesday of each month. And then we have our white-tailed deer capture and our 3-minute thesis competition, which is how you're going to get a spot on this capture, which is the first weekend of November. The 3-minute thesis competition, I just sent out a pretty long email about the logistics for that. If you're interested, send me an email. Good news as well, we just got 10 additional spots on that capture because the other group that was going to join dropped out for that weekend. So now we have 20 spots for our members. We're still having the 3-minute thesis competition on October 22nd, but that should make you feel a little bit better if you are competing because you have a better chance now. So we hope that a lot of you decide that you want to join, and we hope to see you and meet you and learn more about you on October 22nd. We also were invited on a burrowing owl habitat restoration project in October, which we will go over more in the meeting this upcoming Wednesday. But if you're interested in habitat restoration, especially pertaining to wildlife, this would be a really cool opportunity for you to go and get some hands-on experience. And then lastly, our last little announcement, our amazing Lainey Taylor, secretary, has been sending you lots and lots of emails with job opportunities and internships. So please don't disregard those. I know that most of you aren't looking for a wildlife biologist job right now, as you have a few more years of college, but it is a good idea to go into those emails. And if you're interested in that job later on, look at the job requirements and try and figure out how you can hit those job requirements while you're in undergrad so that you are competitive for those jobs when you are ready to apply for them. So definitely don't disregard those, look at those. They might help you kind of figure out what you're interested in working with and also what you need to get done to work with those things later on. So I'm going to pass it over to Joe. Those are our announcements for Texas Tech.
Thank you, Sophie.
Yep.
All righty, I'm gonna try and share my screen real quick.
Go for it, sir.
That'll work. Can y'all see what I see, the screen?
They can. I switched over the stream slides so they have full view of what you have going on your slides, sir.
Excellent. Very good. Well, all righty. I'm just have a few quick slides to update y'all about what's all happening at Texas A&M. So we are continuing with our virtual meetings. They're the first Tuesday of every month over Zoom. We disseminate that Zoom link out through our email listserv. So if you are not on that and want to be added to it, you can just get in contact with me. My email is at the bottom of this screen, Wildlife for Joe. But you can also follow us on all of our main Facebook, our Instagram. We have Hunter Parker, who's on this call too. He's monitoring those very frequently, so we get to see all those messages. All right, so for events that are coming on, we have kind of like what Sophie was talking about, and I'm glad to hear that other student chapters are going this route, is with virtual guest encounters, because we can't really have in-person meetings, so we're kind of breaking up into more guest speakers and just those opportunities to give people, our members. So we're trying to branch out and have as many people as we can speak about their careers and about professionalism. So our first speaker, or first guest encounter, is Madeline Thornley, and she's going to be talking to us about how she started in her graduate school, and some of her technician jobs that she's held before. And then she will be advertising for some technician positions that will be working in South Texas this upcoming year, so from February to July. And that first guest encounter is going to be over Zoom. It's going to be October 14th, and we'll have more information at our first meeting, or our next meeting, I'm sorry. Something else that we're gearing towards is trying to do some workshop videos. And so we just got approval for this, actually. Dr. Tomachek and myself have been working very hard with administration to get approval for taking some members out and getting to video. What we're going to be doing is some wildlife management techniques and practices. And we hope to use those videos for future recruitment and to share with the general public about what it is that we do in the wildlife profession. So I hopefully that will include some, like what some of the images are here. We can do some herping or do some insect collecting and pinning techniques, everything to just the basic management techniques that we use in the field. And lastly, I was just going to say that we do have lots of merchandise. So we're actually have a lot of orders right now. So we're a little bit backed up, but as far as everything shipping wise, we're able to ship and we're getting with the orders as we can every day, but we still have more. And if you are interested in merchandise, I recommend you to send us a message on Facebook, because that's the quickest way we can get your stuff nailed down and we can work with you from there. But that's all I had from that. But I also just had a quick announcement that I found out today is that the national Bioblitz that the National TWS has been putting on has just concluded yesterday, and A&M was actually awarded for their many observations that they had this year. So we had the most observations for iNaturalists, and for our members, I'm very proud of our membership for going out and collecting. I think we ended up with about 2,600 species. So it was really well done. And with that, I will hand it back to Dr. Grissom.
Very nice. Congratulations, guys.
Thank you.
So Texas Tech didn't partake in this, and that wasn't our student problem. That was a Dr. Grisham problem. So Aggies, well done. Congratulations on your success. And for anyone wondering why Texas didn't place, or Tech didn't place, because I told them not to do it, because I was dealing with a bunch of stuff and didn't want to keep track of it. We'll do it next year. So this is not a student problem. This is a Dr. Grisham problem. And if you guys have any comments or suggestions about how I run the club, you may join me in my endeavors at any time. So that said, with our student officers from Texas Tech and Texas A&M, thank you guys for coming tonight. We appreciate your time and attention. We hope you guys join us on Twitch after this. If not, catch us on YouTube or Anchor or Spotify. Just for you guys and for our audience, just search for Wildlife Semi-Filtered or Texas Tech Student Chapter of the Wildlife Society, and it'll get you there. And then after this is over, we'll post all the official links for your viewers as well as ours. Let me rephrase that, for our viewers. So we appreciate you guys coming, but with that, we'll see you guys later. So students, you guys can take off and let the professors take hold. You guys have a good night.
Great. Have a good night.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Bye, y'all. Good meeting you.
Be good out there, guys. So,
Samuel.
I would like to point out, Blake.
Yeah.
Y'all just didn't beat us because you didn't play. That's all you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, when the number 1 seed doesn't play
Bingo.
Kearney, we opted out the 2020 season because we're prepping for the pros.
Although I would point out, you had membership embedded in Wyoming. I mean, embedded. And our kids drove to Wyoming to go make observations. So
I'm sorry College Station smells so bad that they have to go get some fresh air every once in a while, but that's not a me problem.
That's not main campus. There's some satellite campuses that don't smell great.
I mean, the fresh dairy air of College
Are you saying
Station.
that Lubbock smells good? Because I can tell you what, I did live there, and no.
Listen here,
Austin
Hippie
does
Central.
not.
Listen here.
Hey,
I know your Birkenstocks and pot are really.
I had a Costa Rican man staying at my house for a month that was there. He was a scholar, visiting scholar, and he thought that my dog took a crap in his room one night. When the dog did not take a crap in his room one night, because my dog has never done that, it was
this Chester?
south wind. It was Chester, but he didn't do that. It was a south.
It was Chester.
No.
Wait, do you have, is the rendering plant south of you? Is that what it was?
It's
I think it's
southeast.
Oh, then it was a north wind.
It's
It was
an
whatever.
east wind.
Okay, then it's
It's
that
an east
wind.
wind.
It was that wind, and I wasn't there for that long, and it was bad. It was bad. Like he was searching around for poop.
Yeah, but Sarah, I mean, let's be honest. We only get that wind like twice a year, so it's really not that bad.
And you guys have hippies all the
For
time.
a week each.
You either have hippies or you have Austinites, which is much worse.
That's pretty bad. So
It is true.
I will say, when I was at Texas A&M in my PhD, my very first week on campus, I was like, okay, I'm here. There's lots of Aggie jokes, and I'm sure they're all baseless. And it rains a ton in College Station, and I wasn't accustomed to that. And there's an underpass that goes under the railroad that splits campus in half, because hence College Station is a rail station. So I'm walking under this underpass, and they've got air circulators, right? Because you need that outside, apparently. It's a short tunnel. It's maybe 20 yards long. But it rains so much, and the drainage is so terrible on College Station campus that the water was like 8-9 inches deep, and the air circulators were just gurgling water the whole time.
Ugh.
And I thought, good God, all the jokes are true. How many Aggies does it take to design a water movement system? Or apparently more than we have on campus. It's bad. So
obviously, you've never been in Lubbock for an inch of rain, because we have.
You're swimming.
Yeah, it gets really bad.
Yeah.
I understand that.
So that was last year, guys, when I came up to speak to your student chapter. That was one of your very rainy days, and I was really glad I brought my truck that was a little bit higher. But I was really disappointed because everybody talks about that it rains mud, and the rain was rain colored and not full of mud. So I was kind of disappointed. I wanted to get a video of it raining mud.
I think
But wasn't that in the fall though, John? So we don't get the mud rain until spring.
that's spring when you have dust.
Now, any student sitting here debating about going to Texas Tech is listening, going, well, they got hippies at Texas State, they got rain at A&M, but apparently they have a season for mud rain in Lubbock, and they know what season that is, and everybody just nodded. So,
hey, we moonlight for the Chamber of Commerce, so just whatever.
Yeah.
I would say we're a very diverse student body here at Texas State. You know, maybe a little more hippies than you're used to up in Lubbock, but you know, it's not overrun.
So yeah, John, to answer your official question, and the only reason I was telling our viewers that is sometimes our alumni get mad when we don't win something. Don't take it on the students, take it on Dr. Grisham. Because that happened during June when I just wasn't feeling it, and I told our students not to do it. But that aside, congratulations to our Aggie friends. That's amazing. It's
awesome.
Well deserved, and congratulations. And if they ever do this again, yeah, I'll get my shit together and we'll do it. All right. So,
and I really got to give the kids credit. It was all the students and their own self-starting initiative. It had nothing to do with me going, you know what you ought to do. It was them going, wow, it's the pandemic. There's not a lot we're able to do. Let's do something we can do. Where do we have people? What are they up to? And let's go get on iNet and take pictures of cool stuff. So I can't tell you how proud I am of them.
Yeah, they did really well. And in summer, it's hard for me to get in the TTU, TWS spirit because our students are sometimes really hard to get a hold of because they're in Wyoming. They're working relevant field jobs. They're doing all other sorts of cool things. So, that said, moving on from our very minor differences in school spirit to things that bring us together, it's time for Soapbox, which again, if we were a professional podcast, we'd have some kind of cool graphic, but no one has actually offered up those skills yet. So this is the Soapbox. And we had this really kind of all kinds of weird things to talk about tonight. Like, for example, I really wanted to bitch about associate editors for a second, but I think Dr. Conway beats us all on the Soapbox and what he submitted. So I'm going to pull this up for our viewers so they can read a little bit why Dr. Conway explains about this article and the associated impacts, and then we can all join together in our rage. So Dr. Conway, just as a FYI, I'm going to move this over to the main screen, and while we do that, it's just going to be this article, so they can't see our reactions to it. But you may take it over from here.
That's fine.
Well, first I want to know, wait, before you begin, can I ask one question? Can I ask one question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier this popped up. Can you, before you explain the article, can you tell us how you found it? Because I think that is extremely relevant. And you said when you said popped up, what does that mean?
No, so it popped up on a Facebook page that deals with conservation and biogeography, and okay. So somebody posted it, and kind of the premise was they posted it and somebody chimed in like, I guess they were retired, and said, I used to have a drawer full of papers that I thought were really stupid. I guess one of them was one paper that he had in that file for a long, long time was something about what to do with zoo animals in a thermonuclear attack. And evidently this would have superseded that one. So, yeah. So this is actually, even though I like to think of myself as some sort of philosophizer, intellectual, I wasn't rummaging around the Journal of Applied Philosophy and found this. So it literally popped up on a Facebook feed. So
about conservation. About conservation. This is why I was wondering, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, no, it's actually really
you're
good.
in a field relevant channel is what you're saying. That's
right. Yeah. So, so Facebook does have its value at times.
At times.
For those sorts of things. That and like the other, whatever else you like to follow. But that one was pretty good. But yeah, so this popped up. And so I guess the soapbox, or what really grinds my gears sort of segment of this unfiltered podcast. So Blake, I guess they can see the title page or the front page.
They can see the title page, and they can see the abstract, and they can hear your voice in the background as well as the other co-host. And what you just need to do, Warren, is you just need to tell me to go to certain spots in the manuscript as you talk about this, and then our other respective doctors will chime in on their thoughts on this. So why don't you start the discussion, and we'll go from there.
So one of the things that, on a serious note, we often in our field have to deal with a lot of opinions, and it's always been really interesting, I guess, in my career. For whatever reason, if you go to the doctor, you listen to an electrician or a plumber. Rarely do you have a full-blown argument with them about what it is that they're doing and that you know it better than they do. But very commonly in the wildlife world, natural resource world, what Grandpa did and the thing that they saw that one time out on the place by the thing on the thing by the other thing, that sort of supersedes any sort of real training or knowledge that an expert might have. So not that the general public is frequently going to chime in or jump onto the Journal of Applied Philosophy and start quoting things. This is a real paper. This is a real journal. This is a real person that wrote this. And the entire premise is basically focused upon two main points. Evidently, one, that suffering, either by humans or animals, is clearly a wrong. But the solution to that from an ecological wildlife perspective is to herbivorize predators, which is to genetically modify them so their offspring gradually evolve into herbivores. And then number two, painlessly killing those predators such that nothing needs to suffer at the hands of something else as part of their life cycle. And the thing that is interesting, to say the least.
And they can see our faces now, and I can
okay.
Other places. I just wanted to see kind of the reactions and talk about this.
So I think, how this evolved. The author is a scholar, trained at Princeton. Yeah, well,
Princeton.
Yeah, highfalutin.
I got my PhD from Texas Tech.
Right, I got 2 degrees from here. So this is a real paper in that discipline, but this is from our students and from our viewers. When we think about peer-reviewed publications and what it takes to get there, it's a long process.
It's a long process.
It's years of data collection and writing and analyses and reviews and editing and all those sorts of things. But I'm seriously considering putting together a rebuttal to the journal, and this is perhaps a jumping off point for the What Grinds My Gears segment of tonight.
Are we going to go with Grinds My Gears or Soapbox, or I have a serious problem with people?
I have a problem with people, and it's like a Festivus line.
Yeah.
So maybe this is the airing of grievances.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna vote for Warren Conway's Cavalcade of Comedy. That's what it's going to be.
That might catch some wind. I don't know. We'll see.
That's too many syllables and words for me. Sorry.
That's a lot of words.
I got it. Lubbock. Okay.
Yeah, it's going to have to be someone more educated to use that successfully in a common conversation. So
Blake, if you go to that last part, that's the part I think in that conclusion section, without belaboring some of the pontifications in the philosophizing in this paper.
Now you're just busting out all the syllables.
Tomczyk just made up a word. He used like some cavalcader. I don't know what that was.
Look, just because I have a liberal arts undergrad and I learned words in college doesn't mean that they're made up. I had a faculty meeting just today, and I had a faculty member, you may have heard of, Roel Lopez, told me I made a word up, and I made him go look it up. It was a real word.
So
making up words is a sign of pure intelligence, by the way.
I was gonna say I make up words all the time. I just think I'm using them correctly, or I think they're real world words and they're not. And so that's my problem.
I do Fritz's technique, and I like to conjugate wrong words into sentences just to see if people are actually paying attention to the words I use. So
but Blake, what you are currently doing when you're sharing a screen, right? Yeah. You are now virtue sharing.
Virtue share.
Virtue share. What about what's in this coffee cup? Can I virtue share that?
Depends on the alcohol content and at what time we actually have the podcast. So it's after 5. So if you have a problem with that, there's my supervisor. But I'm gonna while we're rambling a little bit here, I'm going to pop up the conclusions to this paper for our readers, simply because I'm going to build off this. I tell some of the students in wildlife techniques and other classes that Bambi really set our discipline back about 20 years because of probably longer, yeah. Because in 2 ways, at the end, the general audience and general public thought it is inhumane to kill animals, and then 2, the suppression of prescribed fire, because at the end, I think Bambi's dad gets barbecued, which is delicious, but most of the general audience and public doesn't think that. This kind of paper is very seriously along the same lines, and I have a very serious problem with old Ben Bramble and his conclusions. So we're going to use this as an opportunity to talk about him. So I want our viewers to read this real quick.
Yeah, read that. If you can highlight like that last sentence or at least the last paragraph. I don't know if you can.
I can't. Maybe I can in PDF, but again, Texas Tech Education here. So let me see if I can get it highlighted.
That's okay.
Yeah, I got it highlighted in green. In yellow. My colors, I still don't know those either. But the real important thing is this section. The final sentence: if my existence depended on my stalking, tearing apart, and eating the flesh of many other beings whose lives involved or produced no less value than my own, I, at least, would not want to keep on living. Well, Ben Bramble, I have a solution to that problem, all right? But beyond that, we need to talk about the consequences of what a statement like that means for the discipline of wildlife conservation and management.
And so along that line too, Blake, though, is more importantly, clearly he's not a scientist. He's a philosopher, right? And so the premise or sort of the direction and the call to action here is not based in science. The paper has nothing to do with science at all. Yet oftentimes this might get picked up, and we may be doing ourselves a disservice by highlighting it, because there may be some people that pick up on these notions, and it catches traction in the media, perhaps, yeah, or in some other sources of literature. And so there are some analogies littered through the paper, talking about humans and summaries, but never really talks about how to painlessly kill predators, and the premise of herbivorizing predators is just ridiculous. And But this is the kind of stuff that people would catch on to and carry because, well, it's in the peer-reviewed literature, right? Or it's at least in the literature in some capacity.
Yeah.
So, the thing about reading things critically as students, as professionals, but also thinking about the impact of what you read and how it might be misconstrued. This is a really good lesson, I think. Beyond just getting into some of from our perspective, the ridiculous concepts that were thrown out in the paper. And so, yeah, these sorts of things are not productive in our world.
They are not.
In a purely academic sense, I think Sarah said it before, maybe he's going up for tenure and need another paper. And he wrote this one weekend. But, in all seriousness, I think, that this could certainly deserve some sort of rebuttal to the journal, because the premises just aren't even based in any sort of realistic or reality in any way.
But it's so hard to do a rebuttal on something when there's like no actual conceptual, no actual thing.
There are zero
it's just
facts.
No, I think the rebuttal could be really quick, really simple, and pretty brief, Sarah.
I agree, but it just seems.
Dear readers of this journal,
this is absolute.
You're wrong. Yeah.
So as my advisor in my PhD would refer to it, pure and unmitigated bullshit.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. There's no scientific fact. But this just reminds me of everyone's crazy aunt who takes one too many pills at Thanksgiving and goes off on a ramble about something. And they put it in a manuscript and it got published somehow, right?
Goes off on a bramble, got it. So
a bramble.
We have successfully verbed the bramble.
So here's one of my problems with it. Number one, as a person that works a lot on predatory species, number one, everything's predatory to some extent, right? But thank you. Exactly, Sarah. If you're a soybean, a white-tailed deer is terrifying, right?
Right. And this is on vertebrates. He's talking about vertebrates. What about diseases and bacteria and viruses and pathogens?
They're not fuzzy.
Right. And then by definition, he's insinuating that the process of carnivory is somehow not useful in the ecosystem and doesn't serve a function and doesn't do a thing, and it's not part of a process that exists. There's no value to it. By the same token, maybe he would say, hey, scavenging is just not a good thing. We don't want anything out there scavenging. We don't need these kind of species on the planet that make use of detritus or that make use of carrion that's on the landscape. It's a slippery slope.
We should eat plastic.
Right. It's
fake food.
It's a morality. It's a morality argument, right? I mean, putting morality on processes for survival.
Yeah.
In an ecological sense. And so, as John, you know better than anybody about the issues and the hot topics about predator control. So, somebody could take a hold of this paper and say, well, here's a call to action for predator control in the most humane way possible, but there's no specificity on how to do it painlessly. So,
one of my issues here, Warren, is when people say, let's talk about painlessly killing these animals, right? As if their existence is a blight on the ecosystem, right? I've heard that logic before. That's very old thinking. It's just he wants to painlessly kill them as opposed to somebody that wants to very painfully kill them. But speaking as somebody that's killed a whole lot of some things, there's not really much of a painless way to do it. Somebody told me the other day, the euthanasia drug that the veterinarian uses is painless. Oh, I promise you it's not. They just give your pet a whole lot of something else so that they can't feel that. But the logistics of something like this, what are we going to do? We're going to go live capture every predatory species out there, and then we're going to sedate them and euthanize them. And the logistics of that, right? But that's a practical person talking too. Good God, how do you justify that according to any model of the field that we exist in? If you just want to grab the North American model of wildlife management, things have to be done for a legitimate scientific reason when we kill an animal. There's nothing legitimate or scientific about this.
Well, did you look at the notes? As I mentioned, I haven't read the whole thing, but I was just sitting here kind of looking through the notes that is after the conclusion. And there's one here. A related option would be to sterilize predators out of existence. I won't consider this option here, as it would be even worse for predators. Sterilizing predators out of existence would cause many of them to feel unbearable pain. Pains, for example, of being unable to reproduce and then to watching their species slowly die out. Like they're just, I mean, it's just like, what is he snowball? Like, what is he just spitballing? Like, what are they even, what?
He never got the message about the fact that you don't anthropomorphize non-human things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that links back to the Bambi notion. You know, Blake, I mean, do you like along that line, do you know what year that was actually first came out?
Like 84, 85, something like
Oh,
that.
40 something.
What?
Yeah,
42.
30.
Oh, good. Lord,
1942.
I'm way off.
And so that's why it's literally generational at this point.
Yeah.
Right. And you put little kids in front of Watch Bambi and without perhaps knowing that information is before the word memed had a different notion. It's actually being memed into the consciousness of as like a baseline sort of reaction that young people have as they're growing up about fire, about hunting, about hunters.
Yep.
Those scenes in Bambi with like them, shooting lead all over the woods and using, intentionally setting a fire in order to get the deer running. And so the vilifying, humans and the sound and the music and all those sorts of things. I mean, this is just sort of a 2020 version of this in a paper form in a lot of ways.
And exactly right. And one of our viewers says, not to mention, it'd be pretty hard to genetically alter a predator species to no longer require the nutrients they need from being a carnivore. And I'll add to that, it'd be hard to grow a 4-chambered stomach over.
Well, yes, that's true. And what this is doing too is it's undermining, like they just have no idea how many of us are out there actually that are working towards conservation and for sustaining wildlife populations, conserving wildlife populations, and it completely undermines that. If this person had any idea of the thousands of people that dedicate their lives in order to do something, even get accurate population counts of animals, much less to actually do any type of other study on them, then I mean it's just it's very undermining.
I tell you what I would truly enjoy. I think a rebuttal is a fantastic idea or a commentary. I really wish I knew a colleague who was actually a philosopher of science, because that's a real subfield. And I would love to have a philosopher of science just eviscerate the good Dr. Bramble for everything.
So John, along that line, there is one at Tech, and so one of the reasons this hit home a little bit, perhaps more viscerally, but external to the topic, is and some of my students know this. Every PhD student that I've had, I've always required that they take a philosophy of science course.
Yeah.
And there's a really good professor at Texas Tech. And so I've had 2 or 3 students take that class here. I had another one, a colleague when I was at Stephen F. Austin. And so I haven't reached out to the colleague at Tech yet, because you're right. And one of the things is I guess the sort of the letter to the editor that kind of got me set off to begin with was like, we attempt, or at least I feel like I am attempting with my PhD students as part of the process of getting a doctorate in philosophy, is to get some philosophy of science background. Some reciprocation would be nice if they have people writing articles like this in their journals, that they would have some frame of reference or some experience about what it is that they're writing about. And clearly, that clearly didn't happen. And so, it was like, why any of us bother trying to expand sort of our students' intellectual knowledge base to the philosophy sort of discipline, in the philosophy of science subdiscipline in particular. It's insulting. And why, if this is the end result, maybe I'm not going to bother doing it anymore.
So I had an animal ethics class as a PhD student at Tech, where we had a political science professor, a professor in philosophy, and a few other professors who are experts in this, combined forces to talk about all of these centric components, and how these viewpoints have changed over time through philosophers' viewpoints, and then where we're at now with like things like animal research ethics, and something like this in this paper in that course would just be totally eviscerated simply because they're not old Bramble isn't doing exactly what Warren said, is taking into consideration all the other subdisciplines and point of view that are centric to having a well-rounded philosophical argument. And I think this guy just needed tenure or something. Whatever.
So, I mean, we've all been there, but at the same time, it's a situation where I also blame the peer review process, right? So to put it back, for any of us serving as an associate editor, or God forbid, an editor-in-chief, if you're so kind as to do that level of service, this would get rejected out of hand.
Yeah, I was looking I have the paper pulled up for our audience now, and sometimes they have associate editors at the end of papers and stuff.
Yeah, I dug around a little on that the other day, and I couldn't really find that.
So to our viewers, this is in the Journal of Applied Philosophy.
Journal of Applied Philosophizing.
Philosophy.
I am not equipped to host this podcast. My apologies.
Thanks, Arkansas.
So here's the address for the journal. It's in UK as well as in Maine, and then with every good journal, here's old Bramble. It's a Gmail account, and one of the consequences of getting a paper published like this is you have an associated email. If anyone does email him, be cordial, by the way, be professional. Yeah. But you can also ask him, what the hell, man?
So I think that's the thing, though, Blake, right? Anytime we put something out there, I had this conversation with 2 grad students today. If you put something out there with your name on it, regardless of the fact that it got through peer review, you're answerable for that.
You are.
Is this some type of society piece, or is it something that maybe was written like as an analogy to something, and now I know it's not, but wouldn't that be like way better if it were?
Okay, so you know what I compare this to, Sarah, is and I'm going to step on consecrated ground and make somebody mad when I say this because it's in our field. I draw an analogy. I had undergraduate student working for me, Zach Johnson. Some of y'all may know Zach. As an undergrad, I sent Zach about the task of keying out 2,000 Montezuma quail wings that had come into my possession. Didn't know what the hell to do with them. Zach, we need you to key them out, sex them, age them, put them away. Okay. And Zach came to me a little bit longer after that, and he said, I have the John's Guard book, right? The Grouse and Quails in North America, and it says how to do it, but it's wrong. Well, Zach, what's wrong about it? He said, well, some of them, buffy edge, okay, that works. A barred across the feather, that works. I've got a lot that are both buff-edged and barred.
Yep.
I don't know, Zach, what's the citation? Well, I don't know. What is it? It's Leopold and McCabe 58. It's Starker Leopold. So this is hallowed ground I'm stepping on, insinuating that the good Dr. Leopold Jr. is wrong. But what I am suggesting is you go read the original manuscript. And what it was is Starker Leopold went down to Mexico and they collected a moderate number of Montezuma quail. I can't remember anymore. It was a dozen or 2 dozen. And he looked at plumage characteristics because nobody had really described them much before. He suggested that this might be a way to age these birds. However, he lacks sufficient sample size, and somebody really needs to go do this for real in a real study design. This is just observational. However, nobody ever did, and it got repeated over the years. And so eventually it's now codified and it's how you do it. And apparently nobody ever looked hard at it until Zach Johnson sat down with 2,000 wings and said, something's not right here. I look at this the same way. Old Ben Bramble's making a set of suppositions, and he's saying, I feel like this is how these things work. Perhaps it really is. Somebody needs to come back and go, the good Dr. Bramble laid some things down, and those were very interesting. Here's why those things are untenable. And maybe he'll have a comeback for us.
Maybe so. That'd be interesting to see.
That would be science, right?
Yeah, and I just got a trash can for its rebuttal. So.
And frankly, John, that would be that would genuinely be a useful exercise too, where it's not just blasting, right?
Yeah. So this is a semi-filtered podcast, everyone. This is us just ranting on the guy. when in all reality, he, every individual who publishes a paper like this deserves to go through the process, even if it is mediocre to utter shit. What is published? At least you can reciprocate in a semi-professional way and say this is worth a conversation. It's okay, you're wrong, but it's still worth a conversation in a lot of ways. So anything else we want to pile on old Bramble before we move on, or we?
I still have questions, but we can move on. Like the questions about how someone, like, who's the first, like, how did someone first come about this paper? Obviously this paper's new. Okay, so you found it on Facebook, but kind of obviously questions that we can't answer because I don't think any of us know the answers to, but how did this get pushed up? Probably pretty quickly. So in any paper that you've ever written, so this was, I mean, it has a DOI number, but I don't know, it says 2020. How quickly has your papers gotten out to people? Has it been this quick for discussion? Because it usually takes us a lot longer, right?
No.
So you write a paper like this, which is complete crap, and this guy's famous.
My
not famous.
My papers are printed,
No, I mean,
are published,
that's a really
printed,
good
and then
point.
right into the shredder. So if you want to find my works, it's in 1,000 pieces in the shredder behind my desk over there.
Well, I mean, maybe you guys are different, but I just kind of go on the assumption nobody ever reads anything I've written.
I was telling Texas State last night, there's maybe like 3 people who will ever read any of the works I ever do, and it's usually stuff that Sarah or Dan have published or my grad students. And I'm usually taken aback by, like, I was telling the Texas State kids last night, I had someone at the latest Texas chapter, it was a grad student, come up and say, "Hey, can you explain what you did on page 12 of this manuscript?" I'm like, no, I can't. I have no idea what you're referring to.
I'll have to read it and get back to you. Yeah.
I'm like, if you have a PDF, I might be able to deduce what I thought 5 years ago on the topic, given the data, but right now, absolutely not. I cannot.
So I think this is really interesting. And, this, y'all know, and for the readership, the listeners, the viewers that don't know, one of the things about Texas A&M that's a little bit different is we have the extension service that's the public outreach arm of the university. And so my appointment's over in extension. And so I'm tasked with producing outreach materials that take all this scientific knowledge, boil them down to the jelly or the jam or the reduction or whatever you want, and give it to the public in a form that is easily understood, but is still scientifically valid. So a few years ago, I had no shortage of questions, people calling or emailing our county staff going, "We're seeing chupacabras all over the place." And what it is it's mostly coyotes, some gray foxes and some raccoons with mange and pretty late stage mange. And that's kind of scary. So I put together some resources about mange and wildlife for people to go read and understand. And that was cool. And then kind of as a tongue in cheek thing, I wrote an outreach pub about the chupacabra. And at the time I was told, "I can't believe you did that, John. I have a publication on chupacabras. It's out there in the world." And now I get phone calls from TV stations that want to do an interview about chupacabras. And I think it's interesting. Any number of scientific manuscripts I've ever written, nobody picks those up. I write an outreach piece that's 2 pages long and pretty simple. And people pick them up and they go, "Hey, I just want to let you know, I read your pamphlet on this and that. I've got questions." And that's really cool. But when they call and say, "We want to talk about chupacabras," where do they come from? Did you read the piece? I said they're mangy coyotes and mange is not good. And here's what, it's basically the same pub. It just says chupacabra on the top.
Oh, no.
So the answer to this is sexier titles, right?
Yeah. Mine even had, forgive me, my Spanish is non-existent. It had the upside down exclamation point on the beginning and the regular one on the end. Chupacabra. I can find it and screen share later if you want. I
want to see that.
I think that's the name of a dance, isn't it?
That's Macarena, Warren. That's Macarena.
So for every boring peer-reviewed paper I ever submit in the future, I'm going to have a sexy title that's not shared unless I can sneak one by the editor-in-chief or associate editor. Given that will never happen, I'll keep you guys posted about things.
Blake, what was the phrase that we had a race to get in a paper? Do you remember?
Hitherto.
Yeah.
Hitherto.
I think it was.
And you won that, so I think I still need to wear my man bun in class. So a few years ago in techniques, this is like the second year of class or something like that.
Yeah. It's been a few years.
All right, we got a troll here on. I'm going to kick off Twitch stream.
Is it Ben Bramble?
It's not Ben Bramble. Literally, the named person is Troll. So,
we woke him up.
That's how you knew. It didn't take.
It's a spam bot.
Way to be a sleuth on that one, Blake.
I told you the deduction is my forte, man. That's the argument coming out.
So astute.
Hey, Blake, I don't mean to belabor this section of the podcast. Would you like to see the Chupacabra pub? I've got the PDF open.
Please do.
Okay, can I screen share?
Yeah, absolutely. You can, sir.
Okay.
And I'll put it up on the big screen for everybody.
Okay, stand by for Chupacabra.
Oh, the coyote's pretty. Wow.
That one's bad. It's late stage mange, and it's not going to make it much longer. And I mean, it is a legitimate pub. We worked through some. I would point out Dr. Scott Hinkey, Texas A&M University, Kingsville,
Okay.
and Terry Inslee, who is a part of our veterinary medical diagnostic lab at A&M. It's a legitimate boiling down of good science, but we got a really sexy title on it. And I will say I had some pushback from my boss at the time about whether or not this should go out. But you know what? It's gotten a lot of traffic. So, yeah.
John, do you think that's simply because of the title, the way it is, the way it's formatted?
Yeah, absolutely. But that's the thing is folks, they see these animals and it's a real thing, right? And we even had, you see here, we've got a chart for what different stages of mange look like. And I've got one for ungulates too, but this one's just for carnivores. And it's a serious thing, right?
Yeah.
We had a person sit down and draw that for us. But at the same time, folks didn't make it that far in the publication. You know how far they made it?
Right there.
Yeah.
So I in 2012, when chickens were being considered, let's fur chickens, not the polio that you eat at the evening, were being considered for listing under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. Everyone had to do everyone being industry and anyone who has associated impacts to the habitat or species had to do environmental impact statement or an assessment of how bad it would actually be given anything that they do on the landscape. And one of them was Elon Musk and the SpaceX program. And they were considering, I think they might have awarded the contract to the city of Midland for a spaceport. And it's been 8 years or so, so I don't remember if it actually came through, but I was contracted as a consultant on evaluating if their space launches and the associated sonic booms would have any impact to the species. Dr. Tomacek, can I end this screen share real quick?
There you go.
And I told them I would do the consulting under two conditions. One, they pay me more than I'm worth, right? One was they pay me a lot, which it was Elon Musk and all those guys. So the answer was yes. That's for the trip to London on 2 hours work. Was that? And two, I wanted to title the name of the consulting document "Space Chickens," and that was aptly rejected. For a myriad of reasons. So I told Clint Bull a long time ago that sometime between now and when I retire, I'm going to get a proposal funded with space chickens. But based on our conversation today, I'm going to add the appropriate exclamation points to be in line with the Chupacabra.
Well, so I think what you do, Blake, is you just do it in a different language and people go, that seems legitimate, and you're off to the races.
So for our viewers who are on right now, do me a favor and pop on Google Translate and look for various languages, the translations for space chickens, and put them in the chat for me so I can very incorrectly pronounce space chickens in other languages. And Timberly's correcting me already for my inability to
I was wondering what she
I knew that was coming because she's actually cultured and intelligent, and she can use the appropriate enunciation and pronunciation.
knows English and other languages.
I
I struggle with English.
and I apologize for any international viewers, like the one who may be on here. I'm from Arkansas, okay? And if you're not familiar with that, Rainey just posted the Russian translations for space chickens. So.
Hang on. I'll see if she's right or not.
Do you want me to copy it in the chat for you?
It's whatever. I'm not that good at Russian, but.
It's let me see if I can copy it real quick and put it in the
that was my foreign language, Blake.
Was it?
Yeah,
really?
because you actually went to Russia during the Cold War, right? So in the chat there,
Yeah, I'm that old.
Yeah, no, that's not. Yeah.
And then Micah says it's Kosmincheki. There's too many syllables and words and vowels.
It's like Chillinuk is the last part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and let me do the pronunciation there. And then she put Japanese in there.
Pop that one up.
Good luck with that.
Had to butcher some languages.
So I apologize for all the intelligent people who are actually paying attention to this call. Again, I'm from Arkansas, and we're known for our lack of diversity in our genetic construct. So
Go ahead. I'll go ahead, Blake, in the chat window, give you it in Czech, just so you've got it.
you speak Czech. Is that your first or second language?
It's one of my, so English and Czech are both my first languages.
Can you pronounce it for us?
The Russian?
No, the Czech version of space.
Yeah, so I just popped it up. It's Vesmírně kurše.
That is generally impressive.
Vesmírně kurše. So outer space chicken. Adjective.
This is amazing. We have all kinds of people.
Gotta get technical, right? You're not talking about some like space somewhere. You mean outer space chickens.
Outer space chickens.
Right.
Outside of the atmosphere of Earth.
That's right. That's right.
What about like a rocket chicken? Because that just sounds pretty cool.
Right?
Well, I like that idea. Huh. Rocket chicken.
What would rocket chicken be in Czech, John?
Well, so rocket's just raketa, so it's not exciting at all. It would be like raketní kurše. So
it's still pretty
that sounds
nice.
pretty badass.
So
just roll the
John,
R's a bunch and it sounds cool. So
John, can we have an entire
Yeah.
podcast where you just speak to us in Czech and then we try to respond to you and what we think you're saying instead of what you actually are?
So that would be interesting, right? I truly enjoy speaking other languages. I think it's interesting. And so this is one thing I maybe a small grain of legitimacy or something decent. I tell students I work with, if you speak another language as a first language, it's going to affect how you interact with the world.
Absolutely.
One thing all of my students need to know about me in Czech, to learn something or to teach something is a verb učit. To learn something is učit se, to teach yourself. I don't expect you to sit here and have me like bestow knowledge on you. You got to work for it to teach yourself. And they're like, oh, well, that's not how English works. It's like, well, I'm the professor and it's how my brain works.
Yeah, it sounds like that's a them problem, not a you problem.
That's exactly, I mean, that's the Texas Tech translation. Yeah.
So, when we tell our students to understand themselves and to understand their pros and cons, one thing one of my cons that I really dislike about myself and I still struggle with is my ability to pronunciate and enunciate the English language is lacking. And that stems over to other languages. And I can
Did you mean your lack ability to pronounce or pronunciate?
Whatever. You shut the fuck up, all right? So you know exactly what I'm talking about, all right? So point well taken, all right? But at the same time, I'm trying to be sincere here, man. We're having our feelings time. And I struggle with other languages because I can't pronounce or use my own correctly.
You're from Arkansas. You're fine. You're
I know.
fine.
I mean, I can speak cotton farmer pretty damn good, but anything else is.
So
Had to go to, I went to speech therapy. Actually, I really had issues when I was a kid. Had to go through legitimate speech therapy. Had a therapy. Had a speech impediment. It comes out every once in a while. It does. When I say Roger Rabbit or something like that, my R's are. I can actually say Roger Rabbit. I mean, I can say it now, but every once in a while I'll slip up. So, I mean, Arkansas and Georgia though are pretty related to people within the same state. I don't know. I'm from Georgia. I got you, Blake. I got you.
My issue is vowels, and especially when you have two vowels next to each other, they run together,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard to pronounce that. And there's probably a linguistics translation for what a definition for what I'm trying to say here is sometimes just certain combinations of letters just I can't pronounce.
Yeah.
But like POO, like pull, POOL comes out as PULL.
Well, that's because of where you're from, though. Y'all say like in what is it, instead of cotton bowl, it's something else, or there's
Cotton
something y'all say. It doesn't make any sense, right? It was my wife's family's from Michigan, and she pronounces BOWL bowl as if there's a TH both.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
Right.
excuse me.
So, but none of you grew up having to figure out how to interpret a Rhode Island accent into like real English.
Yeah, so I think Conway has the eco-region specific vernacular and stuff beat for all of us because he has sometimes the Boston comes out in him when he gets pissed off.
Are you from Boston?
I'm from Rhode Island.
You're from Rhode Island. So I was in Providence. My master's, I did some work at the Providence airport, and I had lived overseas for a while. And I get to the Providence airport, and it's like midnight. I'm doing some stuff at the airport, some bird strike stuff, and the safety guy came in, and I'm kind of tired and looking the other way, and he starts talking, and I totally don't listen because I thought in my head it was a different. I totally thought that he was speaking a different language because I had lived overseas. I'm used to people speaking like German and everything around me, and I finally, after like I don't know how long it was, but I looked at him like, oh shit, he's giving us like how to not get run over by a damn plane, and he's actually speaking English, and I have still no idea what he's saying. So I need to concentrate on this.
So that's a real thing, right? So my wife's grandfather immigrated from Scotland, so she was used to listening to him growing up. No problem. We were in Scotland years ago, and we stayed at a lovely bed and breakfast, and the couple that owned it, they're delightful people. To this day, I have no idea what they said, even though they were speaking English. My wife had to talk to them because I couldn't understand a word. Their accent was so thick.
Yeah.
Lovely people, right?
Well, so along that line, so two stories about my dad, because he's got a really bad accent. So he came when I was in East Texas. He came to visit, and I had a couple students, one from Lindale, one from north of Dallas. Both really good guys. I'm still good friends with them. And we went out to lunch, and they were both working on their masters, and they were talking to my dad, and they couldn't understand my dad. He was having trouble understanding them. So instead of like talking more slowly and trying to enunciate, they just started talking to my dad like louder.
Oh yeah, that's the thing.
So at one point, my dad's like, "I'm not deaf. I just can't understand you," because like the whole point was that they were just butchering and they just could not communicate. But as a kid, one of my dad's good friends, he called him. His name was John Koopa, and I thought forever his name was actually Cooper. Because that's how Rhode Islanders sort of butcher the end parts of names. Well, he was a professor at the University of Rhode Island, and that's where I did my undergrad. And I knew he had an office in the building. I'd been there for like a week or so, and I had never seen the name spelled. And so I went into the secretary's office, and I was like, "Hey, I'm looking for Dr. Cooper," because I was correcting how it should have been said. Although the way my dad had always pronounced it was just Koopa. And so I go to the secretary's office and I'm like, "Hey, is Dr. Cooper around?" And she's like, there's nobody by that name here. Who are you looking for? He's like, "Well, he teaches, resource economics." He's like, "Oh yeah, Dr. Koopa." And I'm like, "No." Like nobody can pronounce his name right. And so, well, he's down, two doors down or wherever down the hallway. And I've been walking by it for like 2-3 weeks. but it was literally spelled Kupa. It was like the one time my dad's accent was dead on and how you're supposed to pronounce pronounce his name. For like 20 years I never knew that. But yeah, because you just automatically translate a Rhode Island accent into proper English and how to spell.
Yep.
That's
So
funny.
one of our viewers actually translated space chickens into Morse code for us. If we wanted to beep that out,
Nice.
so thank you for that person for that recommendation, which we will not follow because as you can see, we struggle with the English language within the four windows here. So my grandpa, I have his inability to use the English language, and he owns it because, like he says, he's actually one of the most intelligent persons I've ever met. But he's got a high school education, and he says, "Well, I'm not educated." And I said, "Well, you're pretty smart." Um, but I've dubbed it the Cotton Farmer's Poetic License, and that's just fuck all. Just use it as you want. Use the English language as you want, and everyone else can deal with it around it. And I totally have that in various ways. And and to not belabor the subject of our inability to use words, let's move on to the next segment, which is the major segment of Aldo Leopold, who was actually really good with words. Because
you used the segue right.
Nice.
You used the segue
segue.
properly. Yeah.
See, I may not be
well
able
done.
to pronunciate or enunciate, but I do know how to link topics for the successful deliverable of the materials in this podcast. So, yeah,
Connectitude and linkativity. Yep.
very good. I give myself a 10 out of 10 on that. I give myself a 2 out of 10 on English language, but I'll do that. So the main topic tonight for everyone viewing in is kind of a continuation of what we talked about during the last podcast. Of that topic then was that sounds like a you problem, and it's kind of an intro to for our freshmen at Texas Tech and other universities in Texas about what to expect as someone with a wildlife or fisheries or rangelands degree or biological sciences. But most of that information was how to succeed. So, towards the end of it, after a coach pep talk from Dr. Conway, where we all took a knee and listened in, I thought the next topic should be, um, kind of along the lines of we are not alone in this world, and the only the single best representative of that is giving our students and everyone who's viewing in an introduction to Aldo Leopold and some of his early writings, or his writings, not early writings, some of his writings and quotes and topics. And the one thing that I was thinking about during that entire conversation was his famous quote, or one of many famous quotes. And for anyone who is viewing in now live or in the podcast later, I really encourage you to go buy a copy of a Sand County Almanac and read it thoroughly, even if you are not words. If you're not an NRM or associated discipline, simply because it's extremely well written, it's poetic, it's beautiful, and then beyond that, it lays the foundation for one of the major philosophies of humans being part of the landscape and not on top of it. And within that text, there's just a myriad of quotable quotes. So a Sand County Almanac basically details the calendar year from his farm in Wisconsin and the ecological changes. And toward the end of it, it switches over to the land ethic, which is maybe more important, but it probably is more important than Sand County Almanac. It's not as quotable, but it is beautiful, and I recommend everyone read it. But one of the famous one of the numerous famous quotes from that book, Sand County Almanac, is one of the consequences of an ecological education is one lives alone in a world of wounds. And then Leopold goes on to say, why that is. And that's generally in the 30s when he wrote this, is if you have an ecological education, you can look out on the landscape and recognize the scars from our misdeeds via misuse of his own 5 tools, which that's in game management: the axe, cow, plow, fire, and gun, or the underuse of those things and the associated consequences to vegetation communities, um, and game. Because in the 30s, when Leopold wrote game management, it was specifically for game. But that's transitioned over time, and now across the United States and even in Texas, there are numerous programs at the BS, MS, and PhD level that offer ecological educations in some form. It might be an ecology degree or natural resources degree or biology degree. But one thing I wanted to build upon that quote is we kind of no longer, at least within our discipline, live alone. And we don't hold that struggle. We're not responsible for keeping that struggle within. Whereas I think Leopold may have had that struggle. I don't know. That's for the philosophizers to think about. Him and a few others at that time, the dozens of people who had ecological education, may have felt alone. And sometimes, I guess, at least part of this conversation that we should have is sometimes we feel alone, at least within our families. Like, what, you're that weird person doing that weird thing with the animals. But that's where we're at with this topic today. So in general, Leopold, his writings, what it means for us now and what it meant in the past, and what it means for us as part of a greater community of people who are interested in conservation and ecology of animals and all things free and wild. What does it mean to be one of those persons in 2020? So that said, do you guys have any insights, or should I Google something real quick?
I'm going to defer to our esteemed guest, the good Dr. Fritz, on this one.
So, Sarah, let's start out with this. Why don't you share your favorite Leopold quote with our audience?
Well, I have many. I'm not gonna lie. And you guys, selected your quotes first, so no, I'm just kidding. No, I really do. I really do have a lot. But to back up a little bit, we talked about Bambi earlier, and we were talking about this publication. I am a Bambi kid. I grew up in the suburbs of Atlanta. I grew up not experiencing the outdoors very much. I mean, I did on my own because I always had to, but not being exposed by other people. Of course, my father took me fishing some, my grandfather, and then my uncle took me camping a lot. And he unfortunately has passed, but he's the one that got me out. And I remember the first time he showed me bear scat. And, I have a pine cone collection that he started because for my birthday, he got me a pine cone. And so when I first went to the University of Georgia, and let me back up again. Being a Bambi kid, I guess my dad hunted some, but no one taught me about it. I was a little girl, right? And so I did not have that education and that taught to me by any means. So my question whether I was a little girl is I was a pretty big tomboy, but still not taken out with, my father or anybody. And not that they knew that they were doing anything wrong, and they weren't super avid hunters anyway. So, after a while, they basically, I guess my father kind of quit hunting. He only did every once in a while. And, I cried about Bambi. So when I first went to the University of Georgia, I was animal science major because I didn't know what that was. And I was like, I like animals and I like science. And my first lab ever, I castrated a bull with a pocket knife. Literally my first lab ever at the University of Georgia. And I was like, okay. In that class, I castrated a lot of other animals too. And that's great. I mean, I worked at a vet for many years, so I have done a lot of spays and neuters and all the things, but not really what I wanted to do. So I moved to Europe for a while and screwed off and came back to school and, was flipping through the class schedules and saw these wildlife classes. And I was like, I wonder what those are. And I had friends that went through the ecology school, which is also great at Georgia, the Odom School, and which is right next to the Warnell School. And so I was thinking about ecology, but I started taking some ecology classes and some natural resources classes. And I really enjoyed the hands-on and the natural resources classes. And I started talking to Bob Warren a lot. And he was always had an open door to me. And I was kind of telling him in some kind of way what I was trying to do without having the language to be able to describe what I wanted to do, because I did not know that this was a profession. I had no idea. So when I got to Georgia, I'm in the classrooms, and there's deer heads everywhere, and there's this and that, and I still didn't really fully comprehend what was happening. I was not educated on any of these subjects. I would never say that I was like anti-hunting. I was never like, oh, we shouldn't hunt, but I was definitely uneducated about hunting. So when I first got there and we started reading the Sand County Almanac, the Sand County Almanac I thought was great, but I was just, all these things were new to me, and I was getting thrown a lot of information. And one of the big one of the big things that I learned a lot about at Georgia too was quail. Bob White's there, and I had friends that worked at Tall Timbers, and I ended up working at Tall Timbers and the Itchaway Center, the Jones Center, and there was a lot of predator control issues or topics being discussed. And so for me, this quote that I selected today was from Thinking Like a Mountain, because I think that was one of the first ones for me that really spoke to me, just because of where I was in my life at that point. And so the quote is, "A measure of success in this is all well enough, and perhaps is a requisite to objective thinking, but too much safety seems to yield only danger in the long run. Perhaps this is Thoreau's dictum. In wildness is the salvation of the world. Perhaps this is the hidden meaning in the howl of the wolf, long known among mountains, but seldom perceived among men." And what I wanted to do with this quote too was also, we were talking about the original, our soapbox pieces, right? And Warren's was so good that none of us got to talk about any of ours, which is totally fine and amazing, because we could probably go on about old Bramble for another. We could ramble about Bramble for a good old few more hours.
Ramble.
The Ramble.
I'm gonna start using that in faculty meetings when someone is saying something that means absolutely nothing in context of the conversation at hand. I'm
Straight up rambling.
Yeah, stop rambling. We got shit to do. Let's move on.
Got brambles.
Warren is like,
we should.
You're gonna yeah, and I'll have to explain why I'm laughing.
Yeah, I'm gonna put you on the spot on that one.
Yeah, well, it might come out with your rebuttal. We'll see. Yeah, it'll be good.
Rebramble, in fact. The rebuttal to the rebuttal from Dr. Bramble is the rebramble.
The rebramble. Awesome. But one thing I was thinking about too when I selected this, actually I wasn't thinking about it when I did. I was actually went on my morning walk and started thinking about it more this morning. But I did pick one of these papers. The pop ad that I selected today was something that I've seen in BBC and NPR and all the outlets for a while. It's like 1 million species at risk of extinction, and why we need to worry, right? And so COVID has brought this new worry to people. Okay, this is what happens when we destroy habitats, and but we've been doing that for a while, and how is this going to benefit humans? And so I think it kind of went hand in hand for me, even though I didn't plan for it to. The inherent acceptance or just value of wildlife versus this ecosystem service perspective, which I personally don't have that perspective. When people say, why do you do this? It's not, I mean, maybe I do, because maybe personally it's for me. Maybe I feel like I'm doing something by working with wildlife. So I've thought about that a lot too. And that's a whole nother, I don't know, hierarchical structure on that. But I think that, to put everything in the context of humans, which we do a lot, which a lot of humans, I guess, need is just another way to, I don't know, not really appreciate, but and also undermines what we don't, or I guess not really undermines it, makes it seem like we know more than we know. Like at this point, Aldo did not realize that, going and shooting a wolf, he was just in that mode, and he did that, and he went and shot these wolves, and he did commonly, and then not really thinking about the cascading effects of that. And I think that, I don't know, that was pretty interesting, but we still do it, right? So now we have some people on with wolves and some not, and I get that. But then it's still every animal, now, so some of the charismatic megafauna have been more protected, but like, how do we incorporate this into other species? And will humans ever think a different way?
Yeah.
Wow, that was a long rant. I'm sorry.
It was excellent. That was quite the bramble.
I brambled on that
one. I'm teasing you. And to add to that, when Sarah said she was a tomboy, the reason I concur with that, because she wholeheartedly kicked my ass one night at a TCTWS meeting. Somebody tackled me. I had no idea who it was, and it was Fritz. And like, I probably outweigh her by a good 40 or 50 pounds, but she beat the shit out of me that night. So, so I'm trying to pick a fight with her.
I used to wrestle.
You were amazing.
Did you wrestle, Sarah, or did you wrestle?
But for our viewers, so part of the land ethic is one of the chapters is thinking like a mountain. I think that's the correct title. And for a long time, Leopold was known for harvesting predators, apex predators such as wolves. And there was a chapter where he shoots a female wolf, I think. Is that correct?
Yes.
And after he shoots her, he looks into her eyes and then has a serious conversation with himself about what it actually means. Not only from his perspective, but the ecosystem perspective. And that was one of the drivers for him to conceptualize the land ethic. So, he did switch.
Blake.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's readily available or not anymore, but it was a handful of years ago. I don't know if it was the Aldo Leopold Foundation in concert with the Forest Service, I think, put out a short movie called Green Fire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. And Tamberly was actually just talking about Green Fire. In our chat. But yeah, she might have I know we had the DVD at one point, but the viewers want to try to find that, because it's really good, and it kind of puts Sand County Almanac into context, because that's one of the most famous quotes. Yeah, there you go. And do you know what year that was? Can you tell, John?
2011.
Oh God. Okay.
I know.
So I'm going to put
2 years ago.
I'm going to put it in the chat for our viewers here. But if you're listening in on the podcast at a later time, it's aldoleopold.org/teach/learn/green-fire. Just search for the Aldo Leopold Foundation, and the title of the film is Green Fire.
I haven't even seen that.
Sarah, you're froze up, by the way. So we see your smiling face, but nothing else.
I tell you what,
by the way,
I never freeze in any position that looks nice, and
she
Sarah
looks lovely. She looks really nice.
She looks poised. She looks happy. When I freeze, it's like,
right.
Although I will say, for those of y'all that know Micah Rainey that are listening in, so Micah is one of my master's students right now. Micah and I were on a meeting the other day, and I apparently froze doing one of my wild gesticulations, and I looked like the guy from History Channel going, aliens. And like Micah Rainey does, she turned it into a little meme that said coyotes. And what can you do, right?
Micah just said in our chat, email me for the photo. So if
There you go.
interested viewers want to see Dr. Tomacek in his non-flattering pose, Micah can provide the email in the chat if she wants to. If not, otherwise I'm not going to dox her via the internet. So that said, Green Fire, very good point, Dr. Conway. Check it out, everyone. But also I encourage, especially anyone who is pursuing an ecological degree, read a Sand County Almanac and a land ethic, and read it more than once. I try to read it once a year.
I think one of the things that's interesting about this topic, and Sarah, are you still here, just frozen, or are you gone?
She gone.
I think she might be gone.
So
She's gone.
she comes back in. I'd love to get her weigh in on this too. So working on carnivores, working on predators, and having been all over that management spectrum myself, it can be a little bit difficult. And where Leopold was working at the time is not all that far from where Mexican gray wolves got reintroduced later. And what I think is interesting is if you've never been to the Gila Wilderness or the Aldo Leopold National Forest in Southwest New Mexico, you got to go check it out. But what I think is interesting is when one sits 1,000 miles away from something, it can be very easy for us to sit back and bramble and conceptualize something that we don't have to live with, right? Wild horses fit that description. Folks on the East Coast have got a lot of opinion. No insult warranted to East Coast folks, but they have a lot of opinions about wild horses, but I don't think there are very many in Rhode Island. And my experience with carnivore issues has been, if I deal with a livestock raiser who has losses, they're realistic about their problems. They just wish the problems would stop. And I often will get an urbanite that believes passionately that these animals have value inherently until their pet cat gets killed by a coyote. And then their tolerance for that species is absolutely gone, and they want every last one of them dead. And there's no middle ground.
Yep.
Which has been fascinating for me, and something I never anticipated when I went through school. And then you get out, you start dealing with folks. I thought, well, urban people, they said they were pretty positive about wildlife. And then the next question is, they killed Fluffy. How do you eradicate all of them from the face of the earth? Oh my God. And I think one of those consequences of an ecological education is you sit there and you look at the urbanite who has outdoor cats and you go, the coyote is not at fault here. And now I'm making a judgment call about your pet cat from my perspective, being an ecologist, being a wildlife biologist. And how do I keep myself from brambling? I don't know. I think it's interesting, right? So we can sit back and philosophize, but in the heat of the moment, what do you do?
Yep. And along the same lines, but in a very different ecological way, Leopold was known for much more than just predators as well, and he was game animals and game birds. And I don't remember the direct quote, but along the same lines, in 1933, I think he said, until a prairie chicken costs the same or less than a Ford, or something like that, we will not have prairie chickens.
Right.
And that's kind of the same thing in 2020, is unless we incentivize native grouse on the landscape, they are not valued by the general public. So these are not carnivores, but they are ecological components to a greater system. And one of the consequences of an ecological education is when you value a species for its own intrinsic value, you are left explaining yourself over and over again to the general public about why you think they belong. And
True.
Same argument, different ecological component. And to be fair,
Right.
Although I like the humility of Leopold, and I can't actually remember the line from Sand County Almanac, and I wish I could, because he's got this part in there where he's describing his farm, and he's describing that he planted some trees, and I can't remember if they were white pines or what they were, but he's talking about them, and he goes, I know they're not native, I know they shouldn't be here, but I just like them.
Yep.
Right. And so despite being a foundational ecologist, a foundational wildlife biologist, he admits that imperfect element of himself. I just want them. I just like them. I know they shouldn't be here, but it's what I want to do, despite the fact that most of the book is about his struggles restoring that worn out piece of farm ground to its greater glory.
Yep. And that's one of the consequences of an ecological education, is if you follow suit with the norms of society by planting things now, like Mexican feathergrass, which we know is an exotic invasive, but it also looks nice in terms of desertscape and xeriscape and doesn't use as much water. You're left with that responsibility of the ecological impacts while knowing sometimes it's the best option you got, or you just like it, for example. And to follow up on what Sarah said about the information in is it the Lone Mountain? What's the name of that chapter?
Thinking Like a Mountain.
Thinking Like a Mountain. I'm sorry. One of the other famous quotes is, "Only the mountain has lived long enough to listen objectively to the howl of a wolf."
Right.
And part of that is his reconciliation of his thoughts, is that how dare he think about the wolf from his own perspective as a human, because he is temporary, whereas the mountain in general has been there for eons. And
right. How do we know? Right. Like, who are we to even say what is, what's the best or worst? And we have to make those calls sometimes as wildlife managers, right?
Yeah.
But
and it goes back to our brambling argument earlier. as trained wildlife biologists, we know it's very dangerous to put human emotions on an animal. And our job is to manage at the population level because that's where evolution occurs. And when you start thinking about individual components of a population in terms of individuals and or their thoughts, that becomes extremely dangerous because you cross that fine line into thinking something along the lines of, let me pull up this quote. If my existence, my singular, uh, depended on my stalking, tearing apart, etc., I at least would not want to keep on living. It is apparent that Bramble has not thought objectively about the howl of the wolf from the perspective of a mountain in this case. And
well, just kind of one point to add to that too is I think so to put into context the time in which Leopold was writing Sand County Almanac.
Yep.
He literally was framing the sort of the underpinnings, philosophical underpinnings for how we think about ecological management, wildlife management, natural resource management. So we think of him as a pioneer.
Yep.
And because of that, there's when I guess when we kind of get into this field, Sand County Almanac, even if you didn't grow up in the country and weren't running around in the woods, I think the book speaks to everybody in some way, and every time you read it, it speaks to you in a different way.
Yep.
And so I think kind of what Blake was saying earlier is like read it every year, but to kind of put these things together. His mindset was way ahead of his contemporaries. Number one, he speaks to us now, 90 years later, in very meaningful ways. And one of the things that I think we collectively carry on our shoulders is this sense of there are things really, really wrong that we hope to learn more about to try to fix.
Yep.
And if you getting into the literature again, I mean, there's the starting line, starting point, intro sentence for so many papers. And Blake, you deal with this all the time. Population declines. 100 years ago there were X number of chickens, and now there's and there's actually some sociology work and sort of psychological work of this sort of like this weight of this ecological knowledge that we have that we're trying to fix.
Yes.
Right. That can get really heavy.
Yep.
Looking at Leopold for some words to describe what we see is useful.
Mm-hmm.
It's also useful from an inspirational perspective. And I'm not trying to jump in, but it does kind of flow into the quote that I picked.
Segue.
Which was right? You like that? That was pretty.
That's a good segue.
That was
a good segue. Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty smooth. I'm pretty proud of myself on that one.
I'll give you an 8 out of 10 on that. That was good.
All right.
Hey, before you do though, Warren, can I ask you something really fast?
Yeah.
And maybe all of you, and I'm not trying to cut you off from your quote. What do you think there's anyone right now that we're reading or listening to that is going to have that same impact?
So honestly, I'm sure there is. But the trying to decipher and filter through the noise today is really difficult, right?
Yeah.
At least from my perspective.
And I agree with that. I think much like the mountain in Leopold's work, only time will really dictate what survives, both scientific knowledge as well as cultural filters.
And time. Yeah, I think the time part too. It's like so I don't know. I'm sure there are. I'm sure some of you have seen or listened to Shane Mahoney. He's very sort of in that same style. He's very articulate, very sort of. He's got a very certain tone, right?
Yes.
And so I think in terms of carrying that I don't know, carrying that flame, so to speak, for the North American model is really important. And the thing that people don't often put two and two together is that sort of the development of the North American model in the early 1900s, the formalization of it by the Boone and Crockett Club, and then Leopold coming on top of that from more of a science perspective. It really was sort of revolutionary in a lot of ways. And I think people oftentimes they come to this field in a lot of different paths, right? So Sarah, you kind of talked about how your path got to this. You know, mine was really because of my dad. You know, he grew up in a city. I grew up in the suburbs, but he grew up in a city, and every chance he could, he'd go out raccoon hunting with a neighbor, get to train dogs. You know, he'd go hunt with my uncle. And a lot of what I heard when I was growing up, you know, Rhode Island was heavily urbanized and it was growing. People were moving there. Houses were going up there. Developments were going in. Is the loss of places, loss of place, a sense of place, and what used to be there. Hey, I remember when I was, you know, in college, I used to go do this. I'd hear those stories from my dad all the time. And so even as a young kid, I had at least this framework of understanding that things have changed and not necessarily for the better. And there was a little bit of nostalgia for my dad on thinking about, you know, what used to be. And so I think, you know, when we get into this field, we've got the science part of it, the relevance part. Why is it important to the general public to buy into what we're saying and trying to convince them of the importance of those things? It's really tricky, and it's a lot of weight to carry, because I think, Blake, you mentioned it very early on in this conversation. You know, in terms of talking to even your family or friends, you know, I think the vast majority, for me, for example, the vast majority of people who asked what I was doing in college assumed I was going to be a park ranger.
Same, right? Park ranger or game warden.
Game warden. That's what they know.
Yep.
And that's a group on Facebook. What are you going to do with that? Do you want to be a park ranger?
Yeah. Right. And so, I you know, a lot of these things, I mean, Leopold speaks in a lot of ways, and it's pretty cool that his voice is still so loud.
Yep.
You know, for our current students. And I do encourage you. And then I guess, you know, to kind of just get my quote out of the way, is to keep every cog in wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering. And, you know, what we do, we are trying to tinker to kind of fix things, hopefully, or make things better, without losing sight of where we were, and trying to restore it back to something perhaps that we view as something that's a little more pristine and better than what it is now, with full function, and those cogs and pieces. And that, Sarah, that gets into, you know, loss of species, loss of diversity, changes in those diversity. You know, I think there's a lot to digest, and I think, you know, the evolution of how you think about some writings change depending on where you are in life.
Exactly, and that's why I read it once a year, and that in game management, because my perception on it changes as I gain more ecological information.
Well, and also perspective.
Oh, yeah.
You know, age and perspective of what you're working with, and how you're trying to communicate what you know, and why it's important to the people that you're trying to convince things are important. And in the current climate, it's a challenge, because often it's not what you say, it's how loud you say it.
Yep.
And that's a challenge that I think a lot of our people that we know and work with, they're not loud. They're really intelligent, but they're not loud.
Yep.
And that's a struggle, I think.
Yep. And you're absolutely right. And one thing I do in my wildlife habitat management class, 4309, is I make them read the entirety of game management. And that's one of Leopold's other foundational works. And for our viewers, that one was published in 1933. And Leopold even says in the preface, this is meant to be a textbook. And it reads as a textbook. It is dense. But
well, along the same line, Blake, and for 3306, you know, we're doing, I don't know if any of the students are on tonight, but yeah, they read Sand County Almanac. whenever
Yeah,
I teach that class.
and one of the reasons I have them read game management is simply to show them that to our discipline, Leopold was Einstein at that time. Because Einstein was formulating theories about expansion of space and time within his own mind using logic. And Leopold was doing the same thing for ecology, which I will make the argument is just as complicated.
Well, in fact, in many ways, Blake, more so. And I think that's one of the struggles that young biologists, so the quote, right, the cog in the wheel, the intelligent tinkering, young biologists need to understand you're dealing with the most complex multivariate system you could imagine, because by its own nature, you can't imagine the expanse of it and the interconnectedness. So one must be very careful making judgment calls. And I think the Einstein quote or the Einstein reference is interesting because Einstein's famous for him saying at the end of his career that if in 50 years science had not advanced enough to have disproven most of what he had done, then science was not advancing. He was simply a step along the path. And I think it's interesting, a lot of those concepts that Leopold lays down in game management, we've evaluated, reevaluated, wholeheartedly disproven, come back and said, well, it depends. There's some elements that are true under certain conditions. We took a basic concept, threw it out the window, came back to it, and then refined our understanding to build upon further, which truly shows the maturation of this as a science.
And John, that's where I was going with this whole conversation, and I appreciate that from your viewpoint as well, because the students struggle to catch on to the concept. Because what I tell them is that everyone knows Einstein, right? And in general, aside from the development of the Large Hadron Collider, whatever it is in Europe, where they actually started testing some of Einstein's really heavy conceptual ideas in a scientific way, physics didn't make too many advancements between 1930 and whenever it was. And I'm going to have some physicists email me about it, but I'll meet you outside if you want to talk about it in general, because the difference between their field and ours, and one reason I have the students read game management in detail, is because Leopold lays the foundation for ecosystem habitat management, which is manipulation of several stages for various species. In his book, it's game management. But the difference between Leopold and Einstein is our discipline in the short existence that we've had. We've done exactly what you said. We've taken those ideas and we have tested them in a very rigorous way, albeit where we lack true controls. That's why our discipline's so hard. It's a multivariate world where we only have controls and treatments, and sometimes our treatments and we don't have true controls. We have replications and treatments, and we have advanced our knowledge on that original text in 70, 80 years. But what's really interesting is in his original text in game management, he laid the foundation for what we're doing now for ecosystem management, for the conservation of species 30 years before we even really had a way to test some of those ideas. And that's where we're at now is he was wrong in a lot of ways, but he was using the best available information at his time. And
so I want to tack into that for just a sec, Blake, if you don't mind. There's
Go
something
ahead.
I'll tell all of my students when they come in is our field has some things which have not been ferreted out of it yet because it's still fairly young.
Mhm.
So when somebody tells you something as a broad sweeping truth or broad sweeping generalization, y'all have heard me go on about that before in my maxim about how they're not true, which is of itself not true. The problem is there are things that have gotten into our field that came from traditional knowledge, because many of the things we do came from traditional knowledge, and one must be careful when a statement is made that has management impacts to go, where did we get that?
Yep.
So for example, much of what we know about coyote ecology is actually just ported over from early wolf research or from the observations of fur trappers, which by the way, nobody cared about coyotes until the late 1800s because there's no value on the pelts until wolf numbers started dropping. So it's a fairly limited group of people that said, we know, and then said some things. And folks of Leopold's generation repeated those because it's the best they had at the time. It was a starting place.
Yep.
It's like that Starker Leopold paper. It's a danger if we never come back and go, well, that was a starting place, but let's do better instead of just saying, hey, this is how it is. I think that's one thing. But hey, so the value of an ecological education. When I was in graduate school, a friend of mine from undergrad was doing their PhD in Virginia, went to a used bookstore and found a first edition copy of Game Management, bought it for $2 and mailed it to me. And I was so excited about it. I went and I showed Dr. Nova Silvey at Texas A&M. I said, Dr. Silvey, look, it's a first edition. And he says, nah, I got one better than that. So one of his uncles had been a civilian conservation corps worker, and the CCC had a special printing of Game Management that they issued. And I always thought that was interesting. Somebody along the way thought it was valuable enough for those young people working in the CCC to read it that early on after its first publication. And that always stuck with me.
And for our viewers, if you're not familiar, Game Management was published in 1933, and the CCC was shortly after, during the Hoover administration.
Yeah. But I think this brings up another interesting point too. So Blake, you're talking about, everyone's talking about Einstein and talking about the Hadron Collider and particle accelerators, and you know, maybe there was a bit of a lag, but we see that too. So, you know, a lot of that comes with the tools that we can, the technology that we now have. And we're putting GPS, solar powered GPS units on quail. That, you know,
I have one right here, so I'll show our viewers.
Yeah.
Oh man, and you know what? When we first started having GPS telemetry on quail, I was in my PhD. I caught some of those quail that they put the test models on. That's incredible.
So yeah. I have extremely small hobbit hands. So here's an iPhone 11.
Get in frame. Get in frame. There you go.
So this is, you know, the size of the back of the
yeah,
and that will store anywhere from 1 second to X number of minutes, and you just got to retrieve it. So 60,000 locations it'll store on.
That's incredible.
And Blake, one thing to kind of, you know, maybe add to the Einstein quote or comparison. So, you know, a friend of ours, some of you guys probably know Todd Marandino. He was one of our alums. He works for DU these days down on the coast. So I heard him give a talk years and years ago, and the quote that he used was, you know, well, a lot of people, you know, wildlife, wetland management, waterfowl management was his focus. It's not rocket science. It's more difficult.
Yeah.
And because, you know, you think about engineering, and this is not a knock on engineering or
we can
physics.
Knock on engineering because we always have their failouts come and say our field is easy.
Yeah, but you know, it's mathematically driven, right?
Yeah, right.
You know, and you can make the equations work. You know, what you do, what Sarah does, what John does, you're doing models based on probabilities and with some degree of error. We hope to get the error small. They in a lot of those other fields, they don't deal with error.
Yeah, so the truest form of knowledge is mathematics, and any field that is based in mathematics has zero room for error, but just based on the numbers alone. Yeah. And as you add,
you know, like yeah, I mean, you're adding, you know, and this is one of those sort of multidisciplinary sort of comments, but in what we do, you've got to be have some expertise and knowledge in almost every sort of field.
Yeah.
Changing a tire to living in the woods, to you know, hydrating yourself, to catching animals, to you know, all of it. To also just being able to quickly think in the field and manage problems that come up, you know.
Yeah, it's not simple.
And I'll knock on engineering and mathematics and physics. That requires zero bravery. That sort of field, from a philosophical, can't use words. From that perspective, when you have zero uncertainty, there's no step off the ledge into the unknown. And our job is to reduce uncertainty in our field. And what's even more admirable, and this is one of the consequences of an ecological education, is sometimes we don't give ourselves credit for our successes. And we're in a discipline where we're constantly given bad news, or we give bad news, or we listen to bad news.
Or we simply say it depends, and that's a non-answer to begin with, right? But it carries caveats. I'm going to defend some engineering a little bit, though. In Sarah's point, that transmitter you just held up, there's not a biologist living that could design that damn thing.
That's a very fair point.
And so for those of y'all that do not have better halves and are not married or coupled or partnered or anything, bragging on your better half is an important thing to do. So my wife works at University of Texas at Austin and in the Texas Materials Institute. Just Google them. Their big thing is energy technology, battery technology. The guy that invented the lithium ion batteries 3 doors down from my wife.
Yep.
For university folks on the line, you want to talk about patent revenues? Oh yeah. Universities making money off your iPhone, but they had a social and I attended the social because I'm her plus one. And I'm a novelty for those faculty. I'm enjoyable to talk to because I'm another academic, but they imagine me kind of like, are you a park ranger? It's like what he does is run in the wilds and catch wolves, and that's what they think. But I talked about the GPS telemetry we do on coyotes and on everything, and I described that my limitation is battery. And they said, well, what are you using? And I told them, and they go, oh, God, that's archaic. That's terrible. We have a new battery that we're almost done with. It does work, but we have to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt before it gets commercialized. But your batteries will last an order of magnitude longer than they do right now. And they'll be more sustainable, better source, they'll be cheaper.
We still want to light up your animal, right? Like the old a few years ago when the little scooters came out with the new batteries and they went into flames with everybody. Like, we need to be careful. They need to be checked before we put the transmitter on the animal. But
right. So no, but to point, Sarah, like I was saying, like, wow, actually I get into a whole new world. If I could put a collar on a coyote and it could stay on for 3 or 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it will fundamentally change our field of science. And that for them was super cool.
Yeah, and from an engineering perspective and all the other disciplines, you're absolutely right. But my whole point is for this knocking on engineering just a little bit is because of what you said is they perceive you as just the guy who captures coyotes. When in reality, what we do is much more complex. And one of the consequences of an ecological education is we struggle with promoting ourselves as a true science. And we're
the Hicks.
We are.
Yeah, we are.
We're the Hicks.
I have
I mean, I was
but what we do is really complex.
Yeah. It is. Yeah.
No, sorry, Sarah. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, like, I have been to the particle accelerators, and when CERN was built, they thought that the whole area was possibly going to be sucked into the Earth, and I've been to Fermilab, and I was like a kid there. I looked around, made sure there was no little kids watching, so that I could do like the little kid buttons to learn about. I was like, what the hell is happening here? I was in a relationship with a physicist for a very long time, and and I think one of the things too, when you think about like when there is an implication, so there's science to like know more, and that I'm not saying that's not important. Like, of course it's important, but when you can get that knowledge based back into how to do something about it, how to manage, for us it's management implications. And I think that's more of like more of the divide than some of the different disciplines is like, okay, now you know about that, so which is interesting in its own, I guess, but like, what does that mean, and how is it going to be advanced, or how is that going to advance us or our relationship with something?
And to add to that conversation, one of my fundamental points that I was trying to make is that sometimes we don't share the good news. We're actually pretty good at drawing inferences from the uncertainty around our results for the conservation of species. We don't give ourselves enough credit for bringing species off the ESA or conserving species or understanding what they need in context of all of the variables that go into a particular ecosystem. And I'll be 100% honest here. Our implications is if we do something wrong, one, we lose our integrity, and two, a species might go extinct. But if you think about it from a physics perspective, when they were developing the first hydrogen bomb, they had a person dedicated to solving the equation. If we do this, will we light the atmosphere on fire? I can see where that's really where you want to hold on to the truest principle of mathematics and have zero bravery associated with that, because you want to be 100% certain you won't kill civilization. Whereas most of our decisions at some point, we have some kind of moral um, consequence of eliminating at least one species instead of entire human civilization. So that's just me being fair there. Um, but in general, we just don't give ourselves enough credit for having a really complex discipline.
I think, oh, sorry, Blake.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think there's two things here that are the same thing, though. Is there's that hands-on approach, right? If you read the stories of like the Apollo projects, the Gemini projects, and Mercury as well, and for what they are, they're captured Nazi scientists. Let's be honest about it, right? These early folks in the NASA program, the manned spaceflight program, they do the math, but before launch, the night before, the morning of, they'd go out, they'd pull on their asbestos-lined gauntlets, and they'd go out to the rocket that's being fueled, and they'd pull and they'd tug on things and knock things with ball peen hammers and move on, just to put hands on it to make sure that what they had wrought was actually right. Conversely, your point, for being as limited as we are sometimes in totally knowing the system, there is the art and the exposure to systems that we get as biologists that somewhere along the way you learn enough or absorb enough that you make the right decisions, or you handle things appropriately. You somehow navigate this path to actually making good decisions.
Exactly right. And the whole point of this conversation as a segue into my quote is sometimes we're underappreciated as a discipline, as well as individuals within our own family and society. For example, you know, my family thought I was going to be a park ranger as well, or they had no clue, or they insulted me based on the classes I was taking. And my favorite quote comes from a San County Almanac about the plant, the draba, DRABA, and it's a long quote, but the final part is my favorite quote, where it says, "It's just a small creature," which I can, you know, understand. It's just a small creature that does its small job quickly and well. And that's kind of what we are. We are a small discipline that does our job quickly and well. And the whole quote is quite long, but I'll read it because I think it's quite beautiful. Is Draba asks and gets, but scant allowance of warmth and comfort. It subsists on the leavings of unwanted time and space. Botany books give it 2 or 3 lines, but never a plate or a portrait. Compare it to like Texas bluebonnets, for example. Sand too poor and sun too weak for bigger, better blooms are good enough for draba. After all, it's no spring flower, but only a postscript to a hope, which I think is quite beautiful, by the way. Draba plucks no heartstrings. Its perfume, if there is any, is lost in the gusty winds. Its color is plain white. It leaves wear a sensible woolly coat, as in the leaves and everything are coriaceous. Nothing eats it. It is too small. No poets sing of it. Some botanists once gave it a Latin name and then forgot it. Altogether, it is of no importance, just a small creature that does its job quickly and well. And that really pulls at me from both the perspective of a wildlife biologist and plus a farm kid from Arkansas who didn't want to farm cotton. So both from the cultural and personal perspective, as I was a little bit different growing up in that I didn't care about the farm. I wasn't similar to everyone else there. I wasn't better or worse. I was just different. I didn't fit in. And finally, when I went to college and I found this discipline, I found people I fit in with. And even to this day, I misunderstood. But if it's good enough for the job, it's good enough for me. And that's kind of where I'm at with it. And I could go on about Leopold and the San County Almanac forever because there's so many good things. I mean, if you like dogs, for example, read Red Lanterns and how Leopold realizes he's quite stupid in terms of ecological knowledge compared to his four-legged friend and when they're hunting. But that's the gist of my quote and what I have to say about it for the sake of time. But Dr. Tomachek, what's your favorite quote?
So, in fact, I did not have time to pull a favorite quote for you today. Exactly, but mine's the one about the pines. I know they don't belong there, but I just like them. And so it's something along, I'm paraphrasing, but the one I brought up earlier is honestly one of mine because I like it for as much as Leopold is a giant, he is never afraid of admitting his own personal interest and personal proclivities and things he just does because he likes them. And I think it's interesting to sit back and go, yeah, he's making choices that make him happy for himself alone, and he finds the need to defend himself in those actions. But his defense is simply that he likes it, and that's enough.
Yep. And
that goes back to the consequences of having an ecological education, right? Because if you didn't, you wouldn't even think about it. Most people don't think about the consequence of having their lawns and, you know, whatever ornamental invasive species that they have, and then you do it. And so it actually, I think, ties into that pretty well. Only the people that have that education would even think twice about not having what they wanted planted in their yard.
So my dear Dr. Fritz, I had an interesting conundrum the other day. So as y'all know, I live in beautiful metropolitan Taylor, Texas, which is a town of about 15,000 people. And my family immigrated to this area in the 1870s, and they never leave because that's what you do when you're a Czech farmer. And I somehow ended back here, which is interesting. And so my family helped break the prairie in this area. And we have family stories and family diaries describing what it looked like when we got here, and then how excited everybody was to break it. And on an A&M research property here, I've been doing grassland restorations, and it's fun to put things back in tall grass and watch it grow. And then it brings you a measure of sadness to actually look out over the topography of the landscape and go, you know, all that farm ground, although it's doing good things for people, I know what it should look like. I've been to eastern Kansas, and we had, I'm actually wearing my polo. So the Wildlife Habitat Evaluation Program in 4-H, I helped judge at the national level and help coordinate. We had the contest, the national contest last year in eastern Kansas on the tall grass prairie. And so the students come from all over the country, and they do lots of cool stuff. But the team from Texas is actually from one of the tall grass prairie counties. And those young ladies were amazing at what they did, #2 nationally. But one of them asked me at the end of it, they said, Doc, is this what home used to look like? I said, I mean, more or less, sure. And they said, wow, that would be cool. And so, Sarah, to your point about thinking about these things, in Taylor, Texas, I live in town, and I had some leftover seed from this tall grass prairie planting we did, just part of a bag. Hell, I don't know what to do with it. So I have a small area at the back of my yard that is just difficult to do anything with. And so I raked the ground bare, and I put this tall grass in, my own little pocket prairie in the backyard, and that's fun. And my neighbor has a Chinese tallow tree on my fence line with him. And I've fought tallow on other properties many times. And so my wife told me, we just moved here, don't make enemies out of the neighbors, because I was sitting here thinking about how long of a pulled chainsaw would I need to cut my neighbor's tree away from my fence so that his tallow doesn't invade my pocket prairie. And these are the thoughts you have when you have an ecological education, right? My battle has come home, and by God, I'm going to cut his tallow down. But he loves that tallow tree, and he tends it dutifully because it makes him smile.
Well, hey, John. One thing that I had a really interesting experience with a friend and colleague who was a botanist, and we were working in Texas coastal prairie. And this gets to a lot of the kind of linking a lot of the things that everybody's talked about tonight, including like those small inconspicuous species. So if any of you are familiar with some of the work that like Smions did with coastal prairie and in Texas, you know, a lot of what they consider to be pretty good quality coastal tallgrass prairie might have had 40 or 50 species, right, in a floristic survey. And there's a property near the San Bernard River, Fort Bend County, that it wasn't discovered, but the owners knew that they weren't gonna, they hate it, but they didn't graze it, and it had never been plowed. It still had the Mima mounds and all those sorts of things on that property. The floristic survey of what that is probably one of the truest large chunks of remnant prairie left. And I think the last tally I heard was 341 plant species they found in that prairie. And so like all these things, like it goes back to, you know, the small things that are inconsequential. We don't know what role they may have played, like the daba, but like 6 or 7 or even 8 times as many species in that one, and that's what it probably should have looked like.
Yep.
Right. You know, that's probably what home looked like for prairie chickens, for the people that first, you know, settled in that area. And again, you drive by on the other side of the road, it's Bermuda grass, deep rooted sedge, maybe KR hadn't really gotten there yet, but it clearly was a mishmash of mostly exotics. It was tall grass, and to the general eye, that looked fine. Had cows out there and all those sorts of things. So it's a little bit of weight to carry. I do think that's true, because you kind of know what it should look like and what we're dealing with.
So I'll give you one with I was doing my PhD work in the rolling plains. We were doing quail work, and I had interns work for me that had no experience with any of these things. And purely through observation, by the end of the summer field season, you could drive down a county road and look from the road at properties and go, tell me, good, bad, indifferent, what are the quail counts going to be as soon as we cross the gate? Oh, they can tell you. They've seen enough, they know. And I had one of them remark to me on the drive back from Pampa, Texas, all the way to College Station, made the drive straight through. Going down, he said, on the way up, I thought a lot of these places looked really good. And on the way back, unfortunately, looking at them, all I see is that it's just not in good shape. Mm-hmm. And these are places, I mean, they're shortly grazed exotic grass pastures, improved pastures. Which is a term I love, improved pastures. So my father's a cattleman, and Daddy comes from an era before improved pastures were the biggest thing in the world, and he grew up grazing native grasses. And he says, improved. The only thing it improved was your budget back in the immediate post-World War II period when inputs were cheap. There's nothing improved about it now. It's just expensive. Fair enough.
Yep. I do the same thing for my students in my habitat class, especially from those who are from East Texas, or basically for anyone who has to make the drive from Lubbock to Dallas and or Austin or San Antonio. And, at the beginning of class, it's kind of take a general sample of what do you think this should look like, the areas. And then at the end of class, I said, what do you think this should look like? And they have very different perspectives. And that's the consequence of an ecological education, is they recognize that our vegetation communities, which ultimately are a fundamental component to wildlife habitat, are a mixture of post-climax seral stages and exotic and invasive species. And most people on the drive don't even recognize that. Just think about all the people that use I-20 every single day and drive between Midland and Dallas. And don't recognize that some of that should be mixed grass or tall grass prairie, when in fact it's mostly ash or redberry juniper and mixtures of various improved pastures in some way. And that's one of the things that we suffer with on a day-to-day basis. Just for the sake of time, because we're getting close to the 3-hour mark. Again, we're doing great. And by the way, our last podcast, which did go 3 hours, we had like 500 or 600 views on our various outlets. Like, who the hell wants to listen to us for 3 hours, right?
I feel for you people. I do. I'm really sorry.
What the hell is wrong with you people, right?
Well, it's going by very quickly for me.
It goes by super fast for us. But if we go beyond kind of where we're at now, Micah says wine.
It's only still on here because her boss is rambling and there might be a test on it later.
Right? She doesn't want to get caught off guard when you bust out
wine with an H or without an H?
It's W-I-N-E.
Oh, okay.
Never mind. Never mind.
But I hope our viewers can see here, as you gain ecological education from your time as hopefully a young kid to where we are now in our respective careers, your perspectives on all things wild and free change. And sometimes it's a really hard struggle just making a drive, recognizing what could be. For example, I mean, if you're thinking about just Lester prairie chickens alone on the high plains, even in the 80s, the density estimates were in the millions. And now, we're thinking we're trying to hit 10,000 as a population goal. That's disheartening if you think about the scars upon the landscape and what it means. And one thing I want to emphasize to our viewers here is you're not alone in these conversations. Dr. Conway was talking to myself and one of our grad students the other day about the COVID impacts and the associated issues with mental health, of being isolated and away from family and friends and all that. There was a paper published, and I cannot find this paper. Warren, I told you I tried to find it. I don't know if it was
Yeah.
published in Nature or Science about uh, the basically people in our field deserve grief counseling uh, because
Yeah.
of the struggles that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, just with the situations that we're aware of and the solutions that we're trying to define for very complex problems. And in general, my own thought of this, and it's not true, it's a generalization, which we all know are not true, is that some of the problems that we face on a general day-to-day basis will never even be evaluated until we solve some of the greater issues of society and human needs. So we're always stuck on the back burner. And yet we're geared via some connections in our brain to focus on those things for whatever reason. That we are driven to protect all things wild and free, both at very fine spatial scales to space chickens and at various time scales, and we just can't we can't disengage with that. So what it means is sometimes we're just batshit fucking crazy and tired and cranky and cantankerous, and we need an outlet. I don't know what that is, so that's why I'm having this.
What kind of? I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
I was gonna say I could kind of flip that though. Like I
You
think the
can.
same thing, and I well no I didn't until right now
I was
because
rambling there. So.
No, I'm just saying like I feel like I do this with my non-wildlife friends and you do have this consequence, which often the word consequence has negative some type of negativity associated with it, but also learning can also bring new excitement. I shot my first deer 2 years ago, coming from where I came from, with the help of Sean Gray, Texas Parks and Wildlife, who had a raffle at the TWS conference. I went down to his property. He sat in the blind with me, and I was like, ah! I mean, I was insane. We were only going to shoot does, but a big older management buck came in, and he was like, okay, and I shot, and I was like, okay, what do I do? And I was just so like out of everything. It's like, you sit down and you sit for a while. And I was just like so ecstatic to bring home deer and to, live like I wanted to live for so long, but didn't even know what that meant. Like I garden now, I try to shoot my own food and, and to go over there. And then last year I had my own solo hunt and I got 2 deer and and also just knowing them. And it's like just today, big checker garter snake in my yard. And, people are like, oh, there's a snake. I'm like, cool, there it is. You want to see it. So you also get some very positive things from having an ecological education. And we have to remember that, I think. And coming from my background again, and now to be hunting and living the way I didn't fit in either, and I didn't know what that meant. But now, the level of excitement that we can get from seeing a bug or a snake or a toad is also a very important, not consequence, but positive thing that we can get from this education.
And that's a very good spin on it. I was actually telling the Texas State kids last night, which were on the call, is we do cool stuff.
Yeah.
And I was telling them about my birding band bucket list, and I've held a vermilion flycatcher, which I stole from a student, and a green kingfisher, and all these other cool animals, which most people won't be able to recognize, but when they do, they're like, I don't know what that is. That's cool. What do you do? And for example, I was flying back from Oregon in the preliminary stages of developing some sandhill crane work up there, maybe 2014 or 15. This was before I was taking students, so I'd fly back and forth. And there was this old gentleman in line with me at the Boise airport who had an Air Force hat on, but he also had I think it was an insignia of all the medals that he earned, but in pin form was on his hat. And I just started asking him about his hat. It was obvious this man was very decorated, but he had an interesting life. So I started asking him about it. And then he asked me the same thing. He's like, "What do you do for a living?" I started telling him, like, "Well, I just came from LeGrand where I captured angel cranes using explosives." And I showed him some photos of my phone. And he's like, "I think you're the most interesting person that I've ever met." And I was like, "What? What?" I'm
We
like,
don't get that often.
There's like, really? I was like, "Well, congrats, I'm your new best friend. Thank you for that." But I forget that at some point that sometimes, even though we're misunderstood, we are generally intriguing because we know how to do those things. Like the other day, like there was a white-winged dove that was wounded on the sidewalk, and my house is in front of an elementary school, and it was just laying there. So I happened to go out and just randomly pick it up when kids were walking by. They're like, "Don't touch the bird." I'm like, "It's okay. I study birds." I said, "I'm going to look at it and see if it needs care." In reality, I was going to pull its head off and throw it in the dumpster. But for the sake of the argument, I'm like, "This is a white-winged dove. It's native to Texas." And I said, "It's injured in some way." And I said, "I'm going to look at it." And those kids struck up a conversation. I'm like, "Well, where are you going to look at it?" I'm like, "Well, I'm going to look at its wing here and see if there was any bone damage, and I'm going to feel its head to see if it maybe collided with something." And they're like, "How do you all know that stuff?" And I said, "Well, I've studied birds for 15 years." And they were like, "Cool." And I was like, "Awesome." And even the mom and dad were
Awesome.
like, "That's pretty cool." Like, and it was really clear that they're interesting. So, in contrast to all the negativity, which is, like I said earlier in the podcast, Sarah has all the answers all the time. There is a source of positivity here that we're actually really cool people in a lot of ways, and we do interesting things. I think we just need to do a better job at selling ourselves in some way.
Yeah.
Well, Blake, I think one of the things that we got to keep in mind too is that we do get a chance to do a lot of really cool things that 99% of the Earth's population doesn't get a chance to do, or whatever that percentage might be. So we're kind of a novelty in that way. But when given an opportunity to actually communicate with people about what it is that we do, is learning how to communicate these things in a way that it sort of sparks that intrigue and interest. Because I think for most humans, there's some linkage. It may be a positive reaction or a viscerally negative reaction, but you're going to get a reaction.
Yeah.
And sort of capturing those moments and making them into a positive thing, those are powerful. And you don't know what you just did to that family and to those kids. They're going to remember that. And those are impactful moments for them. And I think that's something cool that I don't think we recognize, that we have an opportunity, maybe even a duty to do more of.
And we had a conversation a long time ago in one of our graduate seminars about, should scientists be advocates? And that's a complex topic. And I can say this, my own philosophy on that has changed between grad school and now. And just my own personal philosophy is, we should be advocates for the things that we love, because otherwise no one's listening.
And that comes with time to be able to articulate that advocacy as well.
Exactly.
Where you're not hung up in the details of your data analysis. Nobody cares.
Yeah, nobody
P values and all of that.
I did a thing. It was great.
No one gets it.
Go ahead, Sarah. I'm sorry.
No, I was just I just wanted to tell a funny story.
Please
from
do.
your white wing story.
Okay,
so when I'm sorry, I know we're running out of time, but I think it's funny. And it kind of spins off of yours. When I first got to San Marcos, I was on a run, and I had my cur dog, who is notoriously bad for bringing me deer. He used to be a long time ago, but anyway, I was on a run, and there's these mansions here, and they have wrought iron fences. And I was running up to, it's near my house, and I see these two men kind of looking at the fence. I'm like, what are they doing? I wonder what they're doing. And I got up and I realized that there was a deer stuck between the fence. And I see them, and they're trying to push it through, so hips through, which is not the way to do it, right? So I was like, excuse me. And I just tied Chester real fast, my dog, to a tree. I had my sports under things on, took my shirt off, tried to hop the fence, and they're like, what are you doing, ma'am? There's a gate, but it was like far away. And so I just got over and I ran up to the deer, like, be careful, it's gonna kick you. And I was like, no. And I blindfolded it with my shirt. I was like, flip it upside down and push it back to me. And they were just looking at me, and I was like, flip it upside down and push it back to me. Like, don't let it kick you. I'm like, I got this. So I had I had its 4 legs. I flipped it back upright. I stood back, took my shirt off its face, and put my shirt back on. And they're on the other side of the fence. And I have these 2 middle-aged men looking at me like, just dumbfounded, right? And I was like, they just kind of look at me like, what? And I was like, oh, hi, I'm Sarah. I'm your new neighbor. I'm the new wildlife professor. And they were like, I mean, I don't know how long they had been there, but like, here's me like running down the street, taking my shirt off to like to make a blindfold. And they were just like, and I love those types of things, So I talked to him for a few minutes and I said, hey, next time, like, flip it over, pull it back to where it was going through. I mean, scare it out the entrance. The hips don't lie. They ain't gonna fit. They ain't gonna fit through that. So you're gonna break this dude's legs, man. And anyway, yeah, I love those times when. But then that is advocacy, even if we don't know that it is, even not at a population level. That was an individual, just as yours was. But those are always really fun.
And small things like that add up over time. There's like official advocacy, and then there's non-official. And at least to our viewers, everything is potentially a non-official advocacy attempt. So always be professional. Say, look, I'm somewhat of a professional, and here's what I did.
Don't just take your shirt off if you don't need to.
Especially in a school zone where there's an injured white-winged dove and there's kids around, That's how
I was properly attired. under the
No,
shirt.
I totally believe you. But just for the sake of time, because we're approaching 3 hours, I kind of want to end this conversation. And for the few viewers that have actually stuck around for 3 hours, which I'm amazed, we do. I'm great. Does anyone who is actually, paying attention at this point in time have any questions for us? Or even better, any recommendations for the podcast in November? Crickets. So
if they don't, they can get baseball stories.
That's right. The next thing we're going to do is just Dr. Conway 3-hour podcast of his thoughts and critique of the World Series in the COVID world.
I have a request.
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
My dear Dr. Conway, I've known you a while. I like you a lot. I have a sincere request. Next time, you have to do your best to put yourself back in your home dialect and actually speak like where you're from.
Hey man, do we all got to do that or just him? Because if all of us got to do that, that could be a problem. You know what I'm saying?
I'm going to need a sixer and a tractor.
Well, I want to hear it.
I'm gonna need to talk to my sister for about an hour to get it queued up again.
Hey, what's the video you shared with me with like 2 guys on the boat? He's like, "Holy crap, Jay!"
Google sunfish and guys from Boston.
That's what
it's a saltwater. Yeah, it's a saltwater sunfish. It is pure gold. It's pure gold.
I like it. So I'll give this reminiscence, and it's only a little bit sad simply because he's passed away now and was dear to all of us. So Dr. Bob Dittmar was a great friend and a great man. What many people don't realize is Bob's first language was German, because his family is one of those founding families of the Texas Hill Country. And I had a colleague at University of Texas that studies Texas German, and they had run into an impasse getting access to families around Fredericksburg to speak to it in German. So I called Bob up and I said, "Bob, you and I are friends. I can vouch for this person. Can you help?" And he goes, "Oh, I tell you what," he says, "I haven't spoken German in years. I'll talk to my sister about it, see if she can think of anybody that still speaks." And in the course of sitting there talking to his sister on the phone, they're arguing with each other like siblings do about who to talk to, who speaks the best German still. And in the course of that conversation, his affectation got thicker and thicker and thicker until he started yelling at his sister in German and they started arguing with one another. And then after a little bit, he got off the phone and he looked kind of dumbfounded. I said, "Oh, Bob, that was great." He goes, and he was struggling to unaffect his English. And I won't attempt to try his accent, but he said, "I haven't spoken German in many years." But again, stuck back with his sister, having an argument with it. Here we are, right? So
yeah. It happens. It's funny when I go home. I carry it back. I know a few things have slipped down a junction periodically.
Same.
But yeah, no,
We know the junction version of me.
yeah. But I'll see what I could do, John.
I
would love to hear it too. I would really. I somehow that slipped that you're actually from there, and now I have to hear it.
Well, and again, I want.
But see, the thing is, if you're concentrating on doing it, doesn't come off right. So I need to get in that mode. I've been in Texas too long.
So
I hear you.
Not too long.
The sitcom How I Met Your Mother actually defined this phenomenon. It's called revertigo. And if you haven't seen it, it's basically when you meet someone from your past, you start acting like that former person that you used to be, and it's called revertigo. So in Dr. Dittmar's situation, he was speaking German to his German sister in their household, and for me, it's just being a redneck kid from a farm in Arkansas. And it's ghost of cultural development past, maybe. I'm not sure. But anyway, we're going to skip the news tonight, and simply because we're approaching 3 hours. Thank you for our viewers who are stuck with us. I'll get this uploaded to YouTube and Anchor and Spotify tomorrow, and I think similar to the old ones, hopefully reach a few hundred viewers, and maybe that will make some kind of impact for our own discipline and for Dr. Leopold and the greater community. But that said, Dr. Conway, Dr. Tomatek, Dr. Fritz, you guys have any final words or anything?
I want to say thank you guys for inviting me, and I also want to say, hey, if you guys don't know these three men here, they are really big proponents of women in wildlife and diversity in wildlife, and have been three of huge influences for me and three very big supporters of me as a woman in wildlife. And I would like to just put that plug in there. I learned a lot tonight, guys, and miss all of you, and hope to see you in person at sometime soon, or at least another Zoom meeting. And thank you so much for your support and everybody that does this.
It's my pleasure. Our pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That's really kind.
That's really nice, and I'm going to cry myself to sleep. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good tears. Good crocodile tears. Sarah, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Sarah.
I wish I had something. You're amazing. Thank you. That's really nice. That means a lot to me. Like I was telling the Texas State kids, are the people who come from my lab and I meet are the most important. So thank you. So one of the consequences of education, ecological education, is you meet amazing people like on this call. And I hope everyone who's viewing in has the same relationship that I think we four have. And that said, everyone is invited to be a part of our discipline and hopefully our family in the long term. With that, we will see you guys on the first Thursday of November for our next podcast. Topic and personnel to be determined, but I'd like to thank everyone here, as well as the student officers from the Texas Tech Student Chapter of the Wildlife Society and the Texas A&M Student Chapter of the Wildlife Society. We hope for that everyone comes back from those societies and that their endeavors with this podcast is successful. And more importantly, we're glad for the collaborations and friendships. So that said, Dr. Conway, Dr. Tomacek, Dr. Fritz, I hope you guys have a lovely Friday and weekend and enjoy the cool weather. To our viewers, all few who are still on, you guys have a pleasant weekend and month, and have a good night. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Good night, y'all.